Ilshad Kuzikov was born in 1960 in Tajikistan, a former Soviet Union territory, into a deeply dysfunctional family. His father, significantly older than his mother, frequently abused her. He had only one brother, and the household could be described as twisted. When Ilshad was just 11 years old, he witnessed a traumatic event that would forever alter the course of his life. His father, in one of his usual violent outbursts, viciously beat his mother and strangled her to death. The reason behind this horrific act was never revealed, and Ilshad did not connect this particular event to the later developments in his life. However, he distinctly remembered that it was after witnessing this incident that he lost his aversion to blood. It was also around this time that he began an incestuous relationship with his brother. In one disturbing episode, Ilshad killed his pet, a large turtle, by smashing it with a hammer. When questioned about why he did it, he merely shrugged and said, "I don't know." After their mother's murder, both brothers were sent to live with an aunt, where they stayed until they reached adulthood. By the age of 13, Ilshad had developed a strange obsession with the human body and dreamed of becoming a surgeon. He even claimed that he could achieve sexual gratification while watching surgery videos on public television channels. Despite this aspiration, he never pursued a medical career due to his poor academic performance. He barely managed to graduate from high school. The family eventually relocated to St. Petersburg, where Ilshad began working as a welder. Records show that he applied multiple times for a job at the local morgue, seeking a position as a body washer, but he was always rejected. At 20, Ilshad was conscripted into the military, where he committed his first known crime in 1982 by attacking a fellow soldier with a wrench. The case was investigated, and Ilshad was placed in pre-trial detention while authorities examined what had happened. Ultimately, he avoided criminal charges after forensic experts diagnosed him with schizophrenia, leading to compulsory psychiatric treatment. After some time, he was discharged and enrolled in the public system to receive a monthly schizophrenia pension of $20, along with an apartment in Leningrad. Ilshad later married a woman he met during his psychiatric treatment, who was also a patient at the same hospital. However, their marriage did not last long. She left him after 2 years because he attacked her with a knife. The woman later testified that Ilshad was an alcoholic and hinted that he might have had homosexual tendencies or, at the very least, was confused about his sexuality. After his wife left, Ilshad found himself alone in his apartment in St. Petersburg, spiraling into a severe mental and economic crisis. It's unclear whether these factors led him to begin eating stray dogs and cats in the early 1990s, but he did not do so in the brutal or simple manner one might expect. Instead, the Sat meticulously prepared the animals, carefully selecting the cuts and crafting intricate recipes for each one. He treated cooking as an art form, describing it as play and experimentation. Yet, cooking stray animals did not bring him any joy. Neighbors noted that he was extremely fond of pets, with a particular affection for his dog. But as his twisted mind further deteriorated, he decided to stop killing animals and set his sights on humans. The first murder occurred in 1993. Ilshad encountered an old friend named Sasha on the street, and they began a casual conversation. The two old acquaintances eventually decided to go back to Ilshad's place to catch up over drinks. Both men were heavy drinkers, and they spent hours consuming vodka and talking. Late into the night and heavily intoxicated, Ilshad made a sexual advance toward Sasha, who rejected him as he was not interested in men. This rejection unleashed a violent rage in Ilshad, who attacked Sasha with all his strength, knocking him onto the table and striking his head before slashing his throat with a kitchen knife. Once Sasha was dead, Ilshot undressed both the body and himself, carefully examining the corpse before dismembering it with the same kitchen knife. The first dish Ilshot prepared to satisfy his hunger was the liver. After his gruesome meal, Ilshot methodically cleaned the body, storing the remaining meat for later consumption. He disposed of the torso in an abandoned basement nearby. The bloodstains on his apartment walls and floors were meticulously scrubbed away with cold water, as he couldn't afford soap or cleaning supplies. A few days later, in November, the neighbors discovered the torso in the basement. No one connected this discovery to Ilshot. Olga Petrovna, a 72-year-old neighbor who lived in the same building, told reporters that the basement was abandoned and always open, meaning anyone could have discarded the torso there. The case proved difficult for both the neighbors and the police to solve. After the shocking discovery, life in the neighborhood quickly returned to normal. The residents resumed their daily routines, and the limited police presence, along with the minimal public attention to the investigation, led people to quickly forget about the mysterious torso. It wasn't until 3 years later that the neighborhood's calm was once again shattered. Sanitation workers were performing their usual rounds, sorting through ordinary garbage bags, when they stumbled upon a grisly discovery: a severed head. The head was later identified as belonging to Misha Bakbak, a 37-year-old homeless man known to frequent the area. Days later, in an old, burnt-out car that had been abandoned for years, the dismembered forearms of the same victim were found. Once again, this event did not cause much of a stir. After all, it was just the murder of a homeless man, and the police did not prioritize the investigation. Ilshot was still far from suspicion. However, his luck would soon run out. Only a month later, another severed head was discovered, this time belonging to Edek Basilski, a 43-year-old man. The horrifying scene was uncovered by Olga, the same neighbor who had previously spoken to the press after the first torso was found in the neighborhood. The 72-year-old woman was walking her dogs around 7 a.m., recalling that it was quite warm that morning. She assumed that either the heat or the smell of rotting flesh had drawn her dogs to a particular spot, where they ran off despite her calls for them to stop. As she approached to scold them, she was met with the grotesque sight of the severed head. She also noticed several sealed jars nearby, containing what she initially thought were old pieces of meat, never imagining they were human remains. Given these discoveries, the investigation finally gained traction. The police learned that the man had been a patient at the neighborhood psychiatric hospital, and an investigator decided to request a list of registered patients from the institution. Alongside the murdered man's name, they found Sasha, Ilshot's first victim. Alarm bells rang. It was possible that the killer they were hunting was also on that list. Women were initially ruled out due to the brutal physical nature of the crimes, and to further narrow down the list of male suspects, a psychological profile was created to identify those most likely to have committed the acts. Several homes were raided with no success until it was Ilshot's turn. On February 14, 1997, the St. Petersburg police cut off the water supply to his apartment, with several officers posing as plumbers. Initially, Ilshot made excuses to avoid letting them in, but when they dropped the pretense and forced the door open, what they found inside was beyond grotesque. The walls were decorated with posters of cute kittens. All around the apartment, on the furniture and the floor, were numerous bottles of Fanta filled with blood. In the kitchen, they found an old pickle jar filled with ears and dried pieces of skin, along with several dismembered limbs and organs, and a well-thumbed copy of Men in the Kitchen, a classic Soviet cookbook. On the balcony, an aluminum pot contained skewered shashlik and Russian kebabs made from human flesh, already assembled and ready to be cooked. Surprisingly, that was all that remained of the last man he had murdered. A police inspector later recounted that, when questioned about the atrocities, Ilshot was neither evasive nor did he attempt to deny anything. In fact, he was quite open about what the authorities had found, even offering the officers a taste of the liver dish he had just prepared in exchange for his freedom. At that moment, Ilshot was arrested and taken to the station, where a long interrogation process began. There was something unsettlingly different about Ilshot that caught the attention of the agents. Unlike most killers who are often withdrawn and antisocial, Ilshot was friendly, outgoing, and disturbingly normal in appearance, so much so that it was disconcerting. The interrogation room on the second floor of the detention center in St. Petersburg was a bleak, austere space. Inside, a lawyer scribbled notes on his pad. The Russian state prosecutor took deep drags from his cigarette, and a psychiatrist, and the only one speaking, was present alongside Ilshot, who was handcuffed to the table. The psychiatrist had cleverly convinced the prisoner that he understood him because he, too, was secretly a cannibal. If a casual observer had entered the room at that moment, they would have overheard what seemed like a normal conversation, with Ilshot calmly sharing recipes with someone he believed to be his new colleague. Without context, no one would have guessed these were recipes for human flesh. The psychiatrist addressed him using a diminutive form of his name to further build trust and security in their relationship. "No, I've never tried that recipe. Is it good?" he asked, maintaining the ruse. On the final day of the interrogation, crucial details about Ilshot's practices emerged. He was highly selective about the cuts of meat he used, avoiding the head, arms, legs, genitals, and intestines. In fact, a trash bag containing one of his victim's severed arms and legs had been found near Ilshot's apartment door. As Ilshot himself admitted, he would dispose of the bodies gradually, throwing away the parts piece by piece in the neighborhood garbage bins. Ilshot was methodical in choosing his victims, carefully selecting those who wouldn't be missed, people without families, stable jobs, or connections to society. This made it harder for the police to track him, as the disappearances often went unreported unless someone stumbled upon the gruesome remains he left scattered across the urban landscape of St. Petersburg. At that time, the police had officially charged him with 3 murders, those of the victims whose remains had been found on the streets. However, due to the sheer amount of human remains discovered in the cannibal's apartment, they feared the actual number of his victims could be much higher. Ilshot himself confirmed their suspicions by admitting he preferred the taste of men over women, and indeed, none of the remains found by passers-by or in his apartment belonged to female victims. Identifying the dismembered bodies found in his apartment was a challenge, not only in determining their identities, but also in establishing how many distinct individuals were among the remains. Ilshot's preferred method of consuming human flesh involved marinating it in a mixture of broth, vinegar, and onions, which complicated forensic analysis. With his trust fully gained by his interrogator, Ilshot confessed his modus operandi. He revealed that he always committed his murders on the day he received his disability pension, a payment he had been receiving for nearly 20 years due to a diagnosis of schizophrenia. He would then seek out a friend or acquaintance who met his criteria, lure them to his home, get them drunk, and proceed to kill them. In the interrogation room, the psychiatrist had brought Ilshot a piece of bread to nibble on while he opened up. Ilshot reflected aloud as if chatting with an old friend, declaring that he had always wanted to be a surgeon, but now realized that dissecting and butchering were preferable. If you're a surgeon, he mused, at some point you have to put the body back together and you lose control over it. But a cannibal kills and can do whatever he wants with the body. In other words, he owns that body forever. The psychiatrist couldn't pinpoint exactly when Ilshat's aspiration shifted from wanting to be a surgeon to a much darker desire, but he suspected that the roots lay deep in Ilshat's childhood trauma, which he had already discussed. However, Ilshat's trauma hadn't rendered him irrational. He demonstrated a clear sense of reasoning, fully aware that killing was wrong. Yet, he justified his actions in two ways. First, that his disability pension was insufficient to feed himself, leaving him no choice but to eat people or starve. And second, that his crimes were a form of societal cleansing, removing undesirable elements from the population. The psychiatrist knew that these were mere fabrications, not genuine beliefs, much like when Ilshat claimed that his cat had spoken to him, giving him the idea to kill. These were lies he told others. However, the psychiatrist did believe that Ilshat's initial motive may have been driven by hunger and economic desperation, but now something far more sinister fueled his actions: sadism. Ilshat's neighbors had never suspected him of being a sadistic criminal. They described him to the authorities as a friendly and harmless man. They knew about his alcoholism and his periodic stays at the local psychiatric hospital, but he was affable and helpful, offering to assist with tasks like changing locks or assembling shelves without asking for anything in return, always delivering excellent results. Like many killers, Ilshat had a strong bond with animals, but this did not make him distant from people. Standing nearly 6 feet tall, he was considered attractive, especially for a Russian man, with a dazzling smile and dark curls that gave him a gentle appearance, lowering his neighbors' guards. Despite his shyness, he was always willing to chat, particularly about his two favorite topics: cooking and animals. When asked about the horrors found in Ilshat's apartment, his 72-year-old neighbor remained unfazed. "Of course, it's terrible," she said, "but during Stalinist times, I was just happy to be able to eat cats or dogs. Some people were even forced to eat their deceased relatives. It was that or starve to death." Criminal investigation specialists believe that the surge in serial killers, many of whom were also cannibals in Russia, was the result of a complex mix of factors: the collapse of the family unit, severe economic crises, the availability of adult material coupled with a lack of intimate education, and more. These elements, combined with Russia's recent history, particularly the dark legacy of Stalinist labor camps and widespread famines, created the conditions for cannibalism to take root. As the interrogation drew to a close, Ilshat murmured something to the doctor, suggesting that no one in the room really believed he was a covert cannibal and that he could help him escape. He encouraged the doctor to do it and meet him outside so they could indulge in their shared interests. The psychiatrist smiled, not wanting to break the trust he had built, but he knew full well that Ilshat would never be free. When the lunch bell rang, Ilshat was led away for his meal, which he eagerly looked forward to. It was his favorite part of the entire process. As he stood up, he joked with the doctor, nodding toward the silent lawyer who hadn't spoken since the interrogation began. "I like the look of that lawyer. He's not bad, good build, strong. What do you think?" Two officers then escorted Ilshat out, and the interview concluded. The psychiatrist had obtained a detailed confession. A few weeks later, Ilshat was declared mentally incompetent and sentenced to spend the rest of his life in a psychiatric hospital rather than in prison. His current whereabouts remain a mystery. Some sources suggest that he may have died in the early 2000s, but no official records exist to confirm the fate of Ilshat, the notorious Russian cannibal who loved to prepare dishes from his victims. Jessica Gutierrez, warmly known as Jessie by her family, was born on December 3, 1981, in the United States. She was the youngest amongst her 3 siblings. The family lived in a modest mobile home located in the rural area of South Carolina. In 1983, the tranquility was disrupted when Jessica's parents divorced. The children were left in the full custody of their mother, Deborah, while David Gutierrez, their father, moved to Mexico, maintaining a transient lifestyle between there and California. Following the divorce, Deborah worked diligently, finding employment at the United States Postal Service to meet the needs of her family, ensuring their well-being despite the challenges of raising 4 children alone. In June of 1986, Deborah found herself entangled with a man whose behavior grew progressively controlling and problematic, exacerbated by his increasing alcohol consumption. Eventually, his behavior reached a tipping point, leading to his expulsion from Deborah's life and home. However, Deborah's hope for respite was short-lived as her life plunged into further darkness. On June 5, 1986, a seemingly typical early summer day unfolded in South Carolina. The weather was pleasant, with temperatures hovering around 30 degrees Celsius, clouds ornamenting the sky. The family spent their day indulging in outdoor activities and nurturing familial bonds. The day concluded with Deborah preparing sandwiches for dinner and painting Jessica's nails before the children were put to bed. Jessica, maintaining her usual habits, requested to sleep in her mother's bed, a request granted by Deborah. However, when her elder brother experienced discomfort and pain later in the night, Deborah allowed him to sleep in her bed, relocating Jessica to the room at the hallway's end beside her sister, Becky. The following morning, Deborah awoke to a scene of subtle chaos, marking the inception of her ordeal. The front door was ajar, the family dog wandering restlessly, and a set of curtains lay on the floor, with the mosquito net appearing to be forcibly removed. Jessica was missing. Her absence was accentuated by Becky's ominous statement attributing her disappearance to a man with a magic hat and beard. A state of panic ensued as Deborah combed through every conceivable hiding spot, hoping to find Jessica playing hide and seek. Her efforts were futile, leading her to frantically search the surroundings of her home, eventually reporting Jessica missing at 9 a.m. The ensuing investigations by the Lexington County Sheriff's Department revealed no signs of a struggle nor any missing items from the house, apart from the papers scattered on the bedroom floor. The conjectures pointed to a potential kidnapper entering through the back window, abducting Jessica without waking her, and exiting through the front door. Search operations extended to the neighboring woods and abandoned structures in the predominantly rural area of Red Bank, especially rural back in 1986. The speculations, searches, and Becky's consistent statement about the man with the magic hat continued to haunt the family, embodying the relentless pursuit of truth and justice in the light of such grim circumstances. They searched many woods and areas with small streams and ponds for Jessica. Searches were made using off-road vehicles across large areas filled with nature. The sheriff's department sent a plane to fly over the area, hoping to find some trace of the girl, but none of the searches were successful. Deborah was taken to the sheriff's department to answer questions about what happened in the last 24 hours. She insisted she didn't know what happened to Jessica, but was sure about who did it. She blamed her ex-boyfriend for taking Jessica, but he said he didn't know where she was. The police also looked into Jessica's father, who was in California at the time. No charges were made against them. On June 7, the FBI and South Carolina law enforcement joined the search. Bulletins were sent nationwide. This was 10 years before the Amber Alert system and way before the internet era, so communication between departments could be slow and cumbersome. The sheriff's department tapped Deborah's phone to monitor all incoming and outgoing calls, in case someone called with ransom demands. The police told reporters they believed Jessica was taken from the mobile home and didn't walk away on her own. Weeks into the investigation, the detectives only had one physical clue found at the home. A fresh fingerprint was found on the open window at the back of the house, believed to be the point of entry on June 5. The fingerprint was sent to the FBI, but no matches were found. In September 1986, the sheriff in charge announced they had a suspect but didn't have enough proof to charge him. The suspect had failed a polygraph test, but since those aren't admissible in court, it wasn't enough for an arrest. After this, there were few glimmers of hope in the following years. In 1987, police in Kansas contacted the Lexington County Sheriff's Department, saying they had a girl matching Jessica's description. Deborah flew to Kansas hoping to see her daughter, but it wasn't Jessica. Deborah returned to South Carolina, determined to keep Jessica's case alive. She and the sheriff often disagreed about the case and argued over the investigation. Deborah decided to conduct her own investigation and keep Jessica's case in the public eye. In June 1989, Deborah told the state newspaper she had found fibers in an abandoned car connected to a family friend serving time in North Carolina for assault. This was a major revelation. 2 years earlier, Deborah had received a letter from an inmate in North Carolina claiming his cellmate had confessed to abducting and killing a 4-year-old child in 1986. The cellmate, Thomas McDowell, was a registered sex offender living in Lexington County at the time of Jessica's disappearance and was known to the Gutierrez family. Thomas claimed he had killed Jessica because she recognized him and said he had thrown her body into a landfill. Thomas also said he had a beard and was wearing a tall cowboy hat at the time of the abduction. Thomas' cellmate not only informed Deborah but also contacted the police with this information. This led investigators to extensively interrogate Thomas, who agreed to disclose every detail about the crime to the detectives. However, he demanded immunity in exchange. Of course, it wasn't a deal the state was willing to make, so he remained in prison in North Carolina, and Jessica's case officially went unresolved. Deborah felt frustrated and angry. In 1989, she told the state newspaper that it felt like they had no rights and that the system wasn't working for the victims. She was particularly upset that no charges were brought against Thomas. After all, he had confessed, and his version matched the events of June 5. But there was something even more surprising. Thomas's fingerprints were taken and found to match the fingerprint found on the Gutierrez family house window. In 2007, 21 years after Jessica's disappearance, Deborah publicly criticized a Lexington County Sheriff's Department and accused them of mishandling her daughter's case. She said that for years she had been afraid of what would happen if she dared to contradict the sheriff, a powerful figure in South Carolina. But after 2 decades, she wanted the case to move forward and knew she needed media attention to achieve it. Local news had access to a recorded telephone call between Deborah and the sheriff in June 1986, just a few days after Jessica's disappearance. In the call, recorded by the Sheriff's Department's wiretapping unit, Deborah argued with him about the case, concerned and demanding answers as he was pulling investigators off the search. The sheriff replied that he would give answers when he had them, and then threatened to pull all his agents off the case and send them home if she interfered with him. Of course, Deborah was angered by the sheriff's response, viewing it as a threat to her daughter's case. She asked him what the people who elected him would think if he abandoned Jessica, and he responded that they could elect him or not because he didn't really care what they did. In 2007, when the call transcript was made public, the sheriff said he remembered that Deborah had accused him of favoritism and not handling the case properly, and it had hurt his feelings. Deborah also expressed her frustration with prosecutor, indicating that she had been trying for years to get other agencies to take over the case, but he had not allowed it. The case was even reviewed by the prosecutor in 2007, but no action was taken to charge or prosecute any suspects. When consulted about it, he stated that most of the evidence was inadmissible, and the little that could serve had an explanation and a reasonable doubt. He also said that without a body, the state would need much more evidence to secure a conviction. After this, the case fell back into obscurity, but its main protagonists were generating their own headlines. In 2014, Sheriff James Metz was charged in federal court with 10 counts of bribery and wire fraud, for which he was sentenced to 12 months in prison. In 2016, prosecutor Donnie Myers was arrested for driving under the influence after crashing his car into a utility pole and abandoning the vehicle. He was fined $1,000 and retired from public service in 2017. In 2021, 35 years later, the case sparked renewed interest. Sheriff Jacob, who was elected to office after James went to prison, announced that the county would collaborate with the FBI's Child Abduction Rapid Deployment Team to take a new look at Jessica's disappearance. In January 2022, finally, there was a breakthrough in the case. Police arrested 61-year-old Thomas Eric McDowell in connection with Jessica's disappearance. The subject, whom the child's mother had always suspected, was considered a person of interest in the case but was never followed up on. He resided in Lexington County in 1986. He was arrested at his home and confined to the county detention center. After the arrest, Thomas was charged with murder, kidnapping, and first-degree burglary for the disappearance and death of Jessica Gutierrez. Based on the arrest warrant media outlets have accessed, authorities identified a fingerprint of the suspect at the victim's house. However, it was not disclosed where the fingerprint was found or when it was identified as belonging to Thomas. Regardless, Deborah was aware of the existence of this fingerprint for years, and it was discovered on a window. For her, this was conclusive proof that he committed the crime, as she cleaned her windows every night, and only Jessica's kidnapper would have touched the glass afterward. In the same arrest warrant mentioned, authorities stated that the man was later identified in a photo lineup, and they also had evidence against him that he had told others he had kidnapped and killed the girl. After revisiting the case in 2021, special agents from the FBI and state prosecutors visited the area. Law enforcement agents from South Carolina assisted in interviewing over 125 people. The investigation was extensive, with over 3,500 pages of records reviewed, and 10 FBI field offices were involved in reviewing Jessica's case. The official statement indicated that the arrest was made possible thanks to many years of dedicated investigative work by local, state, and federal partners, as well as the determination of citizens who never forgot Jessica. Jessica's body has never been found, but perhaps this time, the subject will cooperate with authorities about the facts and disclose the location of the little girl. Deborah Gutierrez is still alive, but the long years waiting for answers have taken a toll on her. Her mental health has been affected by her daughter's disappearance, and this time it was Jessica's sister who spoke on her behalf after learning about the suspect's arrest. She said that her family never thought this day would come. She added that her mother fought tirelessly for 36 years for justice for Jessica, praying not only for a conviction, but also for the death penalty. She expressed gratitude on behalf of her family to everyone involved in the arrest of the man whom she described as an evil monster. Paradoxically, Thomas's neighbors considered him a quiet and reserved person who transported his work materials in a van and didn't seem to be a violent individual. Unfortunately, they will have to wait until the trial to find more answers. Apparently, Thomas has not admitted to the crime and has not disclosed what he did to Jessica. Marlene Warren was born on April 15, 1950, in Michigan, USA. Growing up without a father, she dreamt of having a large and close-knit family from a young age. This dream soon became a reality when she married a man named John, with whom she had 2 children. However, years later, the family faced an unexpected tragedy when John suddenly passed away from an illness, leaving Marlene alone with her 2 young children. Marlene dedicated herself to work, striving to support her children on her own. 6 years after her husband's death, Marlene met a man named Michael Warren. They soon married, and Michael was involved in the used car business. After marrying, he started his own business in this sector. By this time, Marlene was earning good money and chose to invest in Michael's business, also assisting in its management. The business thrived, and the couple expanded it, buying several properties to rent out, improving their financial situation significantly. The family moved to Wellington, a luxurious suburb of Miami, where they bought a large house. Although their life seemed almost perfect, another tragedy struck in 1988 when Marlene's eldest son died in a car accident, deeply affecting her and her younger son, Joseph. After her son's death, Marlene considered selling the rental properties. While the business was profitable, it was also a constant source of worry. Issues with tenants not paying rent or losing their income were common, and Marlene, being kind-hearted and empathetic due to her own past struggles, found it difficult to evict people. However, she and Michael couldn't afford to let people live in their properties for free. Eventually, Marlene wanted to get out of the business to avoid these moral dilemmas. 2 years had passed since her son's death, and the family was beginning to recover and return to normalcy. However, on the morning of May 26, 1990, something terrible and unexpected occurred. Marlene was at home with her son and 3 of his friends who had come over for breakfast. Their kitchen had a view of the driveway. Suddenly, the doorbell rang, and Marlene went to answer it. Her son saw a white Chrysler parked in front of their house. When Marlene opened the front door, she was greeted by a person dressed as a clown, holding 2 balloons and a bouquet of flowers. Marlene commented, "How cute," but then something unexpected happened. The clown who appeared at Marlene Warren's doorstep suddenly pulled out a gun and shot her in the head. Marlene's son and his friends, who were in the house, rushed to the hallway, only to be met with the shocking sight of Marlene bleeding on the ground. The clown, dressed in full costume, stared at them for a few seconds before returning to the white Chrysler and driving away. Marlene's son, despite having an injured leg, urged his friend to drive after the clown, but they were unable to locate the vehicle. Marlene was quickly taken to the hospital in an unconscious state, and the police began their investigation. They first spoke with everyone in the house at the time of the attack. Marlene's son could not identify the assailant due to the costume, gloves, and wig, noting only that the attacker had very dark eyes. His friends added that the clown was quite tall, and that the work shoes worn were strikingly different from the costume. A neighbor walking their dog near Marlene's house also saw the clown but couldn't provide significant information to the police. The investigators started looking for a white Chrysler and sought other evidence. Their first suspicion fell on Michael, Marlene's husband, who had left for a Miami racetrack that morning and was not at home during the attack. Despite having reasons to believe he was involved, such as the family's fondness for clowns and an anonymous tip to investigate Michael and a 26-year-old woman named Sheila Keene, the police found that Michael was around 110 kilometers away from home, making it physically impossible for him to commit the crime. Sheila Keene, who worked at Michael's used car business, was rumored to be having a secret affair with him. This relationship had been speculated by some colleagues. If Michael was in a relationship with another woman and wanted to leave Marlene, he faced a significant financial loss in a divorce, as most of the family assets were in Marlene's name. Despite the lack of concrete evidence linking Michael and Sheila to the crime, the police still considered their involvement probable. Given the disguise used by the assailant, the police considered whether Sheila could have been the clown. Witnesses couldn't confirm the attacker's gender, and Sheila was known for her assertive character. She handled clients who were late on rental payments, often needing to repossess cars, a job in which she was unyielding, and for which she carried a .38 caliber pistol, the same caliber used to shoot Marlene. After the bullet was removed from Marlene's head, it was determined to be from a .38 caliber gun, raising further suspicions about Sheila's potential involvement in the crime. The police revisited Sheila Keene to inspect her firearm, but Sheila claimed that her gun had either been stolen or lost months before Marlene Warren's shooting. leaving the detectives with no solid leads. During their investigation, they learned that Sheila was divorced and that after leaving her husband's house, Sheila moved into a rented apartment, and there were suspicions that Michael Warren, Marlene's husband, was paying for this accommodation. An interesting discovery awaited the police in their investigation regarding the whereabouts of the clown costume, balloons, and flowers used in the crime. 2 days before the attack on Marlene, a woman had entered a costume shop near Sheila's apartment. The shop was closed at the time, but the woman insisted on being served. She urgently requested a clown costume, a wig, face makeup, and a red nose. Despite being told to return the next day as the shop was closing, the woman persisted, and the employees eventually sold her the items. There were no surveillance cameras in the store, so the police had to rely on the employees' verbal description of the woman, who they described as tall and thin with dark hair. When shown photographs by the detectives, the employees indicated that the woman resembled Sheila. The investigation also traced the balloons and flowers to a supermarket located about 1 kilometer from Sheila's apartment. The seller reported that a woman matching the description given by the costume shop employees had purchased these items just a few hours before Marlene was shot. He added that the customer behaved rudely and somewhat masculinely. 2 days into the investigation, on May 28, the police were informed that Marlene had succumbed to her injuries, and the case was reclassified as a murder. The detectives continued their investigation, seeking more evidence against Sheila. They obtained a warrant to search her apartment. Concurrently, they received a tip about a white Chrysler parked 13 kilometers from Marlene's residence. Upon inspection, the investigators confirmed it was the same vehicle driven by the assailant. Inside, they found long dark hairs and orange fibers that appeared to be from a clown wig. During a search of Sheila's apartment, the police found identical orange particles and work boots that matched the description given by witnesses, similar to those worn by the clown. However, due to the absence of routine DNA analysis at that time, all the evidence against Sheila was circumstantial, which could lead to her acquittal in court. Detectives then turned their attention to how the clown had acquired the car used to reach Marlene's house. They uncovered that about 1.5 months before Marlene's murder, a man had mistakenly rented a car from one of Michael Warren's main competitors. When this mix-up was reported to Michael, his reaction was notably strange. Rather than informing a customer about a mistaken car rental from one of his competitors, Michael Warren told the man to just leave the car in the parking lot and put the keys inside. Michael then asked an employee to take him and Sheila to the parking lot and instructed the employee to keep quiet about the incident. The employee witnessed Michael and Sheila leaving in the same white Chrysler. This happened shortly after a serious disagreement between Michael and his competitors, where Michael had been giving his competitors a negative image in his advertisements, which they disliked. Detectives decided to investigate Michael's business further and found numerous legal infractions, including tax and insurance manipulation. They also found evidence suggesting that Michael had used illegal methods to repossess cars, even when clients had paid on time and met all conditions. During this investigation, police spoke with an employee who recalled an interesting incident where Michael and Marlene had an argument at work. After Marlene left, Michael asked the employee how much it would cost to make his wife disappear. Although this sounded suspicious, detectives still had no evidence linking Michael to the murder. Nevertheless, he was arrested for various business manipulations and initially sentenced to 8 years in prison, but was released after 4 years. In 2002, Michael married Sheila and moved to another state. Although detectives could never prove Michael's involvement in the murder, they continued to monitor him. After moving, Sheila began introducing herself to new acquaintances as a police officer and had dyed her hair from dark to blonde. She and Michael opened a restaurant and seemed to have built a good life. However, rumors began circulating among their employees that Sheila had murdered Michael's ex-wife. Apparently, an employee stumbled upon information about the crime and discovered that the police had suspected them. Still, without definitive proof, the case remained unresolved until it was reopened in 2013. A new investigative team requested a re-examination of all available evidence, as DNA testing and other forensic technologies had significantly advanced since 1990. It took several years to re-examine the evidence. First, the orange fibers found in Sheila's apartment, the car, and the crime scene were compared, showing they were almost identical. The most significant lead came later when experts took DNA samples from several hairs found in the white Chrysler and compared them to Sheila's DNA, which matched perfectly. This provided irrefutable evidence that Sheila had been in the same car the clown used to drive to Marlene's house. Sheila was arrested in 2017, then 54 years old, and continued to deny her guilt. She was denied bail and awaited trial in jail. Michael insisted he had nothing to do with Marlene's murder and believed Sheila was innocent as well. He hired expensive lawyers for her, and the trial had been prolonged for years. In preparation for the trial, the police uncovered some previously unknown facts. About a year after Marlene Warren's murder, an attorney who had worked with Michael Warren on business matters contacted them. He revealed that approximately a year before the murder, Michael had asked him a very strange question. If a husband kills his wife, what happens to the property registered in her name? Would it go to the husband? The attorney was surprised by this question, but advised Michael that if the husband arranged for an acquaintance to commit the murder and the court couldn't link the husband to the killer, he would inherit the woman's assets. Furthermore, the attorney shockingly advised Michael that if the murderer wore some kind of disguise, like a clown's, they would likely never be identified and thus escape punishment. Another shocking confession came from a man whose deceased father had worked for Michael at the time of the murder. He confessed that his father had helped carry out illegal plans for extra money, such as rolling back odometers to sell cars at higher prices. On the day of the murder, Michael asked his father to dispose of the gun and the car used by the murderer after abandoning the Chrysler in the parking lot. Before dying, the man's father revealed that the second car was hidden in a river canal. The police found the car in the canal, confirming the witness's truthfulness, although no evidence survived. Sheila's trial was repeatedly postponed until a final date was set for May 12, 2023. However, on April 25, something unexpected happened. Sheila pleaded guilty to avoid the death penalty she would have faced if she lost the murder trial. Her lawyer stated that Sheila was innocent of the murder, but feared for her life, and thus accepted responsibility for someone else's crime. She was sentenced to 12 years in prison for second-degree murder, with about 5.5 years deducted for the time already served and further reduced for good behavior. She was expected to spend an additional 16 to 24 months in prison. As for Michael, his involvement has not been proven, and he remains free. It's unlikely he will ever be charged with his wife's murder, as there is no direct evidence against him. Marlene's son, the sole member of his family, thanked the detectives for uncovering the truth and keeping the case alive for years. Despite the profound tragedy of his mother's death, he overcame his grief, opened his own small construction business, and rebuilt his life. Maria Cash, the sole daughter in a family of 4 siblings, was a resident of the Barracas neighborhood in Buenos Aires. She was born on December 5, 1981, and enjoyed a blissful childhood with her parents, Federico and Maria del Carmen, along with her brothers Maximo, Patricio, and Santiago. From a tender age, she grasped the significance of friendship when she crossed paths with a girl named Carolina at the age of 6, forging a bond that would endure a lifetime. Subsequently, during their 3rd year of high school, Maria and her best friend Carolina welcomed another addition to their circle, Mariana, who seamlessly became an inseparable part of their group. Maria's social circle was characterized by its quality rather than quantity. Although she maintained amicable relations with her family, she bore the reputation of a rather solitary individual. Even when surrounded by people, she possessed the unique ability to disconnect and revel in solitude. As she matured and gained more independence, whenever she yearned for solitude, she would simply decide to retreat in a coastal city in Argentina known for its pristine beaches, distinctive architectural beauty, and abundant pine forests. Upon arriving, she routinely switched off her cell phone, leaving her friends and family without news of her for several days. Maria developed her talents as a designer and took charge of selling the clothing she crafted. Additionally, she was involved in the sales and promotion of various products. In contrast to her preference for solitude and moments of introspection, Maria displayed a warm and courteous demeanor towards others. Acquaintances frequently remarked on her perpetual smile and serene countenance, making her a delightful presence to be around. Her lively and energetic nature added to her charm. Carolina and Mariana portrayed her as a free spirit with a deep affinity for nature. They emphasized that she lived a modest existence, but consistently extended invitations to dine with her friends and never forgot to mark their birthdays, even if it meant gifting them with a handmade flower. Nevertheless, Carolina also noted Maria's enigmatic side. At some point during her youth, Maria joined a spiritual group, a religious movement centered on self-realization. This pursuit resonated deeply with her, as it provided a platform for meditation exercises aimed at achieving inner peace. While seemingly incongruous to outsiders, this spiritual practice held profound meaning for her, accentuating her inherently spiritual and tranquil disposition. Maria's involvement in the group, along with the enigmatic inner circle she cultivated within the group, remained shrouded in secrecy from her friends and family. Despite its fundamental role in her life, she limited her disclosures to the fact that she dedicated extensive hours to meditation in pursuit of self-awareness. It was within the realms of this group that Maria crossed paths with Juan Pablo, a teacher, proprietor of a restaurant, and government employee in Jujuy. He resided in the picturesque town located 13 kilometers to the north of San Salvador de Jujuy. Over time, Juan Pablo and Maria's friendship deepened to a point where their closeness sparked speculations among both acquaintances and family members. Mariana and Carolina recalled Maria's glowing remarks about him. In late June 2011, Maria confided in her friends, expressing her desire to journey to Jujuy to promote her products, a decision that raised eyebrows, considering the considerable distance and geographical separation from the capital. Maria meticulously orchestrated her trip to Jujuy, veiling the true purpose from everyone, or at least weaving 3 different narratives. She casually mentioned her intention to rest, to sell some of her handmade garments, and even claimed that a friend had extended a job offer at a bar in Jujuy. During a phone call in the presence of her friends, she cryptically mentioned a job opportunity from a Jujuy-based friend without divulging further details. She outlined her plans to depart in July and return to Buenos Aires by December. In the days preceding her journey, Maria convened with her friends for a dinner gathering at Mariana's residence. That night, she shared an overwhelming desire to spread the love of God among people. She carried a Bible brimming with highlighted passages, marking a newfound religiosity, as per Mariana's recollection. In reference to her voyage to Jujuy, Federico Cash, her father, explained that she sought serenity and opted for a destination devoid of the chaos of the capital. She had informed him about a job offer at a friend's bar. On July 4, Maria commenced her journey and at 7:30 p.m. left her home, packing minimally, indicating her intention to be away for just a few days. Her father, Federico, accompanied her to the bus terminal, where she was set to board a bus destined for San Salvador de Jujuy, scheduled to arrive around 6 p.m. the following day. Little did he know that it would be the last time he saw her alive. Somewhere along the journey, an event occurred that remains shrouded in ambiguity to this day, lacking clarity in its entirety. What is unequivocal is that on July 5, Maria made an unexpected decision to disembark in Rosario de la Frontera, a town situated in the province of Salta. This deviation from the plan caught everyone by surprise. In subsequent communications with her family and her friend Juan Pablo, she vaguely alluded to her discomfort with certain fellow passengers, citing an unpleasant experience during the bus ride. However, she refrained from disclosing the true nature of the situation. Standing by the roadside, Maria resorted to hitchhiking and ventured southward until she reached Santiago del Estero. None of these detours aligned with her original itinerary. Nevertheless, after reconnecting with her friend Juan Pablo and disclosing her financial predicament, she resolved to resume her journey. He generously offered to purchase her a bus ticket online, enabling her to continue her voyage to Jujuy. Maria eventually arrived in Jujuy in the early hours of Wednesday, July 6. During her stay there, she contacted Juan Pablo from a local mechanic's workshop where she had borrowed a phone. Juan Pablo's sister answered the call, informing her that he was occupied with work and couldn't personally pick her up. Instead, she suggested taking a taxi, with the assurance that they would cover the fare upon her arrival. Subsequently, all communication with Maria ceased. When Juan Pablo returned home, he found her absent. At approximately 4:30 a.m., he sent her numerous messages, urging her to either visit her grandmother's house or one of his own restaurants. He provided detailed addresses and insisted on covering the taxi fare, but received neither a response nor her arrival. Around 2 p.m., the young woman was spotted once more, attempting to hitchhike along Route 34. During that afternoon, she conversed with her family, revealing that she had depleted her funds and was feeling unwell, yet she refrained from divulging further details. On the night of July 6, she was captured on video passing through a toll booth. Notably, she was without her suitcase but carried a backpack. Remarkably, the same backpack seen in the footage was discovered by toll booth employees who chose to retain it and eventually handed it over to the police several days later. According to some accounts of the case on July 7, Maria sought medical attention at a hospital in Salta. However, as the medical examination was about to commence, she opted to depart. Witnesses attested to her appearing disoriented and erratic, as if she lacked a clear sense of direction or purpose. Her overall appearance was somewhat disheveled. Nevertheless, she did manage to consult a pulmonologist in downtown San Salvador de Jujuy. He charged her 100 pesos for the consultation and prescribed medication for a respiratory issue. In contrast to the descriptions provided by those who encountered her at the hospital, the pulmonologist asserted that she exhibited perfect lucidity, cleanliness, and neatness. These conflicting reports presented a perplexing challenge for investigators. On the same day, July 7, she embarked on a journey to Salta. A truck driver who had previously seen her in Pampa Blanca, Jujuy, confirmed encountering her while walking along a street in downtown Salta. Another woman also observed her in the vicinity, seemingly in search of a craft store that included a gym on its upper floor. Around 5 p.m., from an internet cafe in that city, Maria sent an email to her brothers, requesting their phone numbers. In the email, she expressed her desire to return to Buenos Aires, citing the loss of her belongings. Regrettably, the communication abruptly terminated, instilling concern within her family. Consequently, they promptly made the decision to report her disappearance, filing a formal complaint at a police station in Salta. Fearing the worst, her father and one of her brothers opted to embark on a car journey to Jujuy. Nonetheless, their efforts to locate her proved futile, as she had already moved on from the area. It appears that on July 8th, Maria engaged in an unexpected encounter at the toll booth. She boarded a van driven by a producer and former councilman from the Salta locality. He transported her to the roundabout, where Maria once again solicited a new ride. This time, she succeeded in securing a ride from a truck driver heading to Route 34. Witnesses who encountered her in that vicinity attested to her appearing bewildered and disoriented. She disembarked at a religious pilgrimage site and was spotted in the vicinity of the sanctuary at approximately 4 o'clock in the afternoon. Following this moment, all trace of her vanished. Right from the outset, Maria's family pointed out numerous shortcomings in the investigation. For an initial period of 8 months, the case was categorized as a mere disappearance, with the Salta judicial system overseeing the inquiry. However, in early 2012, Maria's father lodged a report suggesting the possibility of human trafficking. Consequently, the case and its investigation were transferred to the federal prosecutor's office in Salta. The investigation proved to be an intricate puzzle due to the abundance of false leads, some motivated by ill intent and others stemming from genuine concern. Furthermore, Maria's physical description was rather commonplace. A young woman of slender build, average height, with dark hair and eyes. These particulars aligned with the characteristics of countless individuals, resulting in a deluge of incoming calls that ultimately led the investigation astray, as these leads failed to yield any substantive progress. One of the most perplexing aspects that impeded the search was the uncertainty surrounding Maria's intended destination. She underwent 3 transfers across different provinces, introducing an additional layer of complexity. A multitude of lineups, extensive interrogations, consultations, and inspections were conducted, all to no avail. Additionally, 2 extensive search operations were carried out in the region and along Route 34 in an endeavor to eliminate the possibility that she had ventured into the wilderness to spend the night or, alternatively, had fallen victim to a crime along the highway. Speculation even arose that she might have boarded another bus and journeyed to a different region of the country. As the months elapsed, the hypothesis of human trafficking began to wane. Maria's age did not conform to the typical profile sought by human traffickers, who typically target adolescents or significantly younger women. Nevertheless, it was never entirely dismissed, with investigators pivoting their focus toward the potential occurrence of a psychotic episode. Remarkably, in the testimony provided, Maria was portrayed as being poorly dressed, disheveled, and seemingly adrift. She embarked on and disembarked from buses, engaged in hitchhiking, and had even misplaced her identification documents. Contradictorily, Juan Pablo, one of the last individuals to converse with her, recounted that during their telephone exchanges, she exhibited a sense of normalcy, offering no indication of being disconnected from reality or under the influence of substances. There was no discernible sense of fear or urgency in her voice, nor did it seem like she was evading anyone. He emphasized that their conversation flowed like any ordinary exchange between friends. However, he did acknowledge 2 aspects that struck him: her admission of having no money and her decision to head to Jujuy without confirming his presence there. He described Maria as an exceptional person, noting that he had never known her to grapple with substance dependencies. He expressed astonishment at her sudden visit to Jujuy because they had lost touch for a considerable period, and out of the blue, she called to inform him of her presence there. Simultaneously with the official investigation, Maria's family pursued their search independently. They frequently voiced their frustration with the sluggish pace of the police investigation and the lack of tangible progress. After her disappearance, they engaged in conversations with numerous truck drivers, shopkeepers, neighbors, and law enforcement officers. Across these cities, they disseminated flyers bearing her photograph and contact information for individuals who might possess pertinent information. It was reported that they gathered more than 4,000 leads, yet the overwhelming majority proved to be either false or malicious. Maria's friend, Juan Pablo, also conducted his own inquiries. They combed through police stations, private clinics, public hospitals, and forensic facilities. The police conducted extensive searches and explored numerous theories, yet with time, most of these leads were discounted. Maria's friends even contemplated the possibility that she might have experienced a psychological episode during which she lost self-recognition, track of time, or fell victim to drugging followed by abduction. Nonetheless, these notions remained firmly within the realm of conjecture due to the absence of concrete evidence. Within this context, it is noteworthy that the relentless search conducted by the Cash family did not go unrewarded. While it did not yield Maria's whereabouts, it did lead to the discovery of other women who had fallen prey to criminal organizations engaged in human trafficking. These women had been ensnared in various locations and were ultimately rescued, thanks to the Cash family's endeavors in sharing their stories with the authorities. Amidst this unyielding pursuit, tragedy befell the family once more. In 2014, during one of their numerous journeys across the country in pursuit of any trace or lead, Maria's father tragically lost his life in a traffic accident in La Pampa. He had ventured there to distribute flyers bearing his daughter's visage. Several weeks following his passing, his wife received the phone call that rekindled her determination, faith, and optimism to continue the fight. Pope Francis extended his condolences for her husband's demise, expressing his heartfelt sorrow. In response, she wrote a letter of gratitude, wherein she conveyed how the Holy Father's compassionate words had filled her heart with love and rekindled the faith and hope that had dwindled from her life nearly 3 years earlier, alongside the disappearance of her daughter. Following Maria's father's tragic passing, his children persisted in their quest to locate Maria. Yet, as is often the case in disappearance investigations, they appeared trapped in a labyrinth, devoid of new leads to guide them. Then, in 2018, a significant development emerged when human remains, including a skull, were discovered in the Bolivian city of Oruro. There was hope that these remains might provide answers about the fate of the young designer, and this possibility garnered extensive media coverage. However, subsequent DNA analysis conclusively ruled out any connection to Maria. The Salta judiciary confirmed that the DNA extracted from the recovered remains did not match that of the Cash family, whose samples had been collected in Salta. Consequently, the mystery surrounding Maria's disappearance persisted, much like it did at the outset of the investigation. In that same year, 2018, a woman named Julia came forward, alleging physical abuse and cruel treatment, and implicating her ex-husband, a prison guard, in Maria's disappearance. She claimed to have witnessed Maria alive and held captive within a human trafficking network, at least until 2013, 2 years after her initial disappearance. Julia's attorney stated that, according to his client's testimony, these women were confined in a piece of land with rented infrastructure. While this lead was diligently pursued, it too failed to yield the discovery of Maria. The subsequent year, in September 2019, as part of this renewed investigative approach, search operations were conducted in an area known as Las Palomitas in Salta, based on information provided by an anonymous witness. Regrettably, these searches produced no results that could advance the investigation. In November 2020, forensic experts released an updated image of Maria Cash, employing age progression techniques. The intention behind this effort was to assist in her potential identification and to prompt new leads. Maria's family expressed hope that this initiative would yield fruitful results. However, once more, these endeavors proved unfruitful. In a succinct recapitulation of the case's progression, in 2023, certain Argentine media outlets revisited the topic of Maria's disappearance. They underscored that during the early years of the search, numerous leads were pursued, and a plethora of hypotheses were formulated. However, as time passed, these trails gradually dissipated, and the prospects of locating her dwindled. Nonetheless, the authorities remained steadfast in asserting that the search had never been abandoned. Marianne Bachmeier was born on June 3, 1950, in Sarstedt, West Germany. Her family ended up there following the public persecution and scrutiny her father faced for being a former official of the German National Socialist Party. During World War II, he was a member of the notorious SS. As a result, Marianne was raised in a very conservative home by deeply religious tutors. It's said that she never had a happy childhood due to a lack of close relationship with her parents. Her father was authoritarian, abusive, and an alcoholic, often spending more time at a bar near their home than with his family. Marianne's mother was also distant, rarely speaking or spending time with her daughter. The situation worsened due to her father's drinking, which increased his aggression towards the family. This ended with the parents' divorce and the father leaving the house. Marianne thought she could finally be free and happy, but soon her mother remarried another abusive man. Unfortunately, instead of Marianne and her mother uniting against the man, they both turned against Marianne, blaming her for the family's problems. This broke their relationship, and Marianne, seen as a troublesome teenager, was eventually kicked out of the house. During her adolescence, Marianne faced multiple assaults from different men, leading to the birth of her first child at just 16. She was forced to give the baby up for adoption due to lack of resources and because the baby's father abandoned her. 2 years later, Marianne got pregnant again by her then abusive boyfriend. Despite the circumstances, she wanted to keep the baby, but before the child's birth, she experienced another traumatic assault at a nightclub. Her boyfriend left her, and she gave up this second child for adoption as well. Later, Marianne dropped out of school and sought work to support herself. She started working at a bar named Tipasa, where she met the manager, and after some time, they became a couple. At 22, she became pregnant with her third child and felt ready to raise the baby with some resources and a home. However, her then boyfriend disagreed with her decision, ending their relationship. Marianne, firm in her choice, decided to raise her daughter, Anna, alone, despite her parents' demands to give her up for adoption like her previous children. After Anna's birth, Marianne vowed to be a good mother and underwent a tubal ligation, a common practice at the time to prevent overpopulation. Marianne and Anna lived together in Lübeck, Germany, and despite challenges, they made it through. Indeed, Marianne was happy because her daughter was the only person in her life who did not intend to harm her, unlike her parents or ex-partners. However, raising Anna alone meant Marianne had to take her to work at the bar, so she could only attend to her daughter during her few breaks. Years later, people close to Marianne would say that she treated Anna like a little adult and expected her to take care of many things on her own from a young age. Anna often slept in the bar while Marianne was working, and a friend described Anna as a very vibrant and creative child who unfortunately never had a pleasant family life, as she only occasionally saw her father at the bar. Some stories also mention that Marianne worked late into the night and then slept all day, leaving her 7-year-old daughter alone for much of the day. Anna used this time to play around the neighborhood alone, greeting people and playing with their pets. It was even mentioned that Marianne was aware of her problematic lifestyle and sometimes contemplated the idea of giving Hannah up for adoption. This leads us to May 5, 1980, where it is unclear exactly what happened that morning between Anna and Marianne. Some say they argue because Anna woke up in a bad mood and stubbornly did not want to go to school but wanted to play in the park, which Marianne did not allow. There's another version where Anna asked permission from her mother to skip school to play in the park with friends, and Marianne eventually let her go, not suspecting her daughter's real intentions to play elsewhere. Regardless, Anna was playing outside when the ensuing events turned into a tragedy in Marianne's life. When Marianne returned home later that day, she found it strange not to find her daughter anywhere but decided to wait a few more hours for her return. As time passed and Anna did not return, Marianne started searching the neighborhood. She asked Anna's friends and locals if they knew anything about her daughter, but nobody knew anything. It was as if she had vanished into thin air. So Marianne reported this anomaly to the police. The next day, a very upset and nervous woman arrived at the police. It seemed that this man, Klaus Grabowski, 35 years old, was overcome with guilt after the act and couldn't find peace. he ended up confessing in detail what happened to his girlfriend. This caused a great argument, after which he left, confused, to go to a bar for a beer. His girlfriend took this opportunity to go to the police station to report him. The truth was that Anna had been abducted by Klaus, who owned a butcher shop near Marianne's house. Anna had gone there intending to play because the man had promised her that she could play with his cats whenever she wanted to visit. Innocently, Anna went and rang the doorbell. Klaus received her and kept her in his house for several hours, assaulting her multiple times until finally, to prevent the child from confessing the facts, he ended her life by suffocation with a pair of his girlfriend's stockings. Klaus Grabowski had a history of criminal activities and had previously been convicted for the assault of 2 young girls. He was known to have a troubled past. In 1973, he attacked a 6-year-old girl and was charged with attempted murder. 2 years later, he faced charges for these crimes, leading to a psychological evaluation. The results indicated he had an abnormal sexual instinct and significantly limited capacity to control it. Consequently, he was sent to a psychological treatment center instead of prison. A few years later, Klaus was offered the option of undergoing a controversial chemical castration procedure in exchange for early release, which he readily accepted. This procedure involved administering drugs to reduce libido and testosterone levels, reducing the likelihood of reoffending. Klaus preferred this option over returning to a mental health facility. It was a common practice for offenders of such crimes, often resulting in reduced sentences under the assumption that they no longer posed a societal threat. Despite the reversibility of this procedure, Klaus was released soon after undergoing it, without subsequent psychological evaluations. 2 years later, he underwent hormonal treatment to reverse the chemical castration, increasing his testosterone levels. This treatment was approved by the court under the pretext that he wanted to start a family with his girlfriend and lead a normal life, thus misleading everyone about his true nature. On the day of the incident, authorities quickly headed to Klaus's residence, but couldn't find him. He had taken Anna's body and left a note for his girlfriend, asking her to meet him at a bar that night to discuss the situation. The police took this opportunity to wait for Klaus at the bar and arrested him upon his arrival. After his arrest, Klaus claimed he had no intention of inappropriately touching Anna. He despicably defended himself by alleging that the child tried to seduce and extort him, and fear of returning to jail drove him to end her life. He claimed Anna had threatened to tell her mother he had inappropriately touched her, a claim he insisted was false and made with the intent to extort money from him. Klaus revealed he had hidden the body in a cardboard box near a canal. When the police informed Marianne about her daughter's whereabouts and tragic demise, she was devastated. However, the trial brought further anguish. Marianne was forced to hear testimonies and descriptions about her life and Anna's, suggesting that Anna was practically raised on the streets and that such an incident was inevitable due to Marianne's negligence as a bar waitress who worked late nights and neglected her daughter. This left Marianne heartbroken and furious, particularly tormented by the possibility that Anna's killer might not receive the maximum penalty due to potential claims of mental health issues, which could allow him to avoid prison. Consequently, Marianne silently began to devise a plan to avenge her daughter's death, regardless of the consequences. During the trial, Klaus Grabowski repeatedly claimed that Anna had seduced and extorted him for money, insisting that his actions were driven by the fear of returning to jail. His defense also centered around the idea that the hormonal treatment he was undergoing significantly affected him and led to violent outbursts. Frustrated and injured by these lies, Marianne decided to buy a gun and secretly practice shooting. Every time Marianne attended the trial, her displeasure was evident, especially when she heard statements that defamed her 7-year-old daughter. At one point, she expressed clear anger, unable to bear listening to Klaus and his lawyer's fabrications. However, the trial took a dramatic turn on its third day, March 6, 1981. Marianne arrived at the courtroom later than usual, entering with an expressionless face. She walked with an upright posture, her hands in the pockets of her white coat. Unbeknownst to others, she had managed to bypass the strict security measures of the judicial establishment with a pistol in her pocket. As the judge and others in the courtroom carried on with the proceedings, Klaus, with his back to Marianne, faced the judge. At this moment, Marianne stood still, her nerves palpable. She seized the opportunity to act when Klaus stood up to give his statement. Marianne pulled out the pistol and fired 7 shots, 6 of which struck Klaus, causing him to collapse. The precision of her shots was noted by many. Marianne remained expressionless throughout, slightly moving her lips as she fired. She made no attempt to flee and did not resist when the courtroom security detained her. Marianne was heard saying, "That pig killed my daughter. He shot her in the face, but I shot him in the back. I hope he's dead." Her wish was confirmed when an officer checked Klaus and declared him dead. Upon hearing this, a look of relief crossed Marianne's face, contrasting her previous expressions. However, Marianne now faced her own trial, which would not be easy to escape. Those who witnessed the incident noted that Marianne seemed to be in a trance, struggling to comprehend her actions. The forensic psychiatrist examined her, asking her to write something to analyze her handwriting and mental state. Marianne wrote, "I did it for Anna," surrounding the sentence with 7 hearts, possibly representing each year of Anna's life. The next day, German newspapers displayed Marianne's photo, dubbing her the Avenging Mother. The case became the most well-known instance of vigilante justice in West Germany, garnering extensive media coverage. Television crews from across Europe rushed to report on the case, highlighting its extraordinary and tragic nature. Marianne was quickly brought to trial for murder. During her trial, she testified that she was not fully aware of her actions, claiming she was in a trance and even had a dream where she saw Anna walking through the courtrooms. She also mentioned her mental health had deteriorated significantly following the events. Marianne then told a lie that likely worsened her standing with the judge. She claimed she had bought the gun to end her own life, but no one believed she hadn't premeditated her actions and practiced with the weapon before using it in court. Many people in Germany and around the world supported Marianne for taking matters into her own hands, as they felt the system had failed by previously freeing Klaus and authorizing his hormonal treatment without proper evaluation. They saw it as fair to set her free. However, there were also those who viewed Marianne as a criminal who had taken justice into her own hands in the worst possible way, labeling her a murderer. Others judged her for being an irresponsible mother who had given up her other 2 children for adoption and committed a cold-blooded crime that could have harmed others in the process. With all this controversy and mixed feelings, Marianne was charged with murder in a judicial process for the death of Klaus Grabowski on November 2, 1982. The prosecution later withdrew the charge, and after 28 days of negotiations, the jury reached a verdict. In March 1983, Marianne was convicted of involuntary manslaughter and illegal possession of a firearm, sentenced to 6 years in prison. 3 years later, the authorities reconsidered, believing she didn't deserve any sentence. Soon after, Marianne sold her life story for about 250,000 German marks in an exclusive to a news magazine, stating she did it to pay off the debts caused by the judicial process. Following the fall of the Berlin Wall, she returned to a now unified Germany after being diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. During this time, Marianne was interviewed by various media outlets, often placed in tense situations with questions comparing her to Klaus, as both were murderers. Despite this, she maintained her composure, stating she did what she did to ensure Klaus faced justice for his actions against the 7-year-old girl, even as he continued to spread lies about her in his final moments. Knowing her illness was terminal, Marianne asked a reporter to accompany her with a movie camera until her last moments. Marianne passed away at the age of 46 on September 17, 1996, from pancreatic cancer. She was buried next to her daughter Anna's grave in the Lubeck Cemetery. Hella Bennett was born on April 12, 2002, in Georgia, USA, into a family beset by conflicts. To understand the environment she was born into and lived in during her short life, we must understand her mother, Charity Lee. Her life was fraught with challenges from a young age, marked by tragedy and later struggles with substance abuse and problematic relationships. Charity was born on the outskirts of Atlanta, Georgia, to Killa Clark Bennett and James Robert Bennett, Jr. A defining moment in her childhood occurred when she was just 6 years old. Her father, a 37-year-old trucking company owner, was fatally shot in a violent attack inside their home in an exclusive residential area of Atlanta. He was found with multiple gunshot wounds to his head, chest, and back. The police reported that he was alone at the time of the crime and that there were no signs of struggle at the scene. Initially, authorities suspected organized crime. However, the aftermath of James's funeral brought a shocking development. Charity's mother, Kayla, then 29, became the prime suspect in his murder. The charges were laid just 3 days after the couple, previously divorced, had remarried in Las Vegas. Evidence against Kayla included details like the unlocked doors of their home and her status as the primary heir to the trucking business. Additionally, the patrol officer who transported Kayla post-arrest noted that she occasionally exhibited satisfaction in her demeanor. During the trial, evidence was presented suggesting Kayla had been in contact with a truck driver and might have been involved in a crime. Despite this, the jury found her not guilty due to insufficient evidence, leading to her acquittal. The presiding judge described it as the most peculiar case of his career, given the variety of plausible angles and hypotheses. The controversy surrounding her father's death and her mother's high-profile trial deeply impacted Charity. During her mother's imprisonment, she was cared for by her maternal grandparents. Throughout her childhood and adolescence, Charity sought love and approval from her mother. In a desperate bid for attention, she intentionally turned to drugs, frustrated by her mother's apparent disinterest. At 17, Charity battled depression and heroin addiction, straining her relationship with her mother to the point of being kicked out of the house. With just $100 given by her mother, Charity faced a stark choice between rehabilitation and potential overdose. This money, however, became her lifeline as she chose to enter a rehabilitation center in Chattanooga, Tennessee. She achieved sobriety for about a year, finding a place to live and enrolling in college. Nevertheless, her journey to sobriety was fraught with internal battles against her darkest demons. Nevertheless, during these difficult moments, she attempted to end her life on several occasions. At the age of 18, Charity became pregnant with her first child and at 3 months pregnant, decided she must definitively leave behind that dark stage in her life to become the best mother for her unborn child. That baby, whom she named Paris, became the motivation she needed to recover. She often said that her son had saved her life. When Paris Lee Bennett was born on October 10, 1993, in Abilene, Texas, Charity was alone because the father of the child had left her as soon as he learned of the pregnancy. Later, when Paris was 17 months old, his father returned to their lives. Charity recounted that it was clear the father was not well, having been diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia and experiencing auditory and visual hallucinations. Paris was a very artistic and creative boy who enjoyed drawing. Beginning at the age of 3, he was introverted, not very sociable, and reluctant to show affection to people he knew. The boy, who dreamed of becoming a paleontologist, was focused on his academic life. He studied a lot had an IQ of 142 and never had problems at school. His performance was much higher than his peers, and his teachers considered him a unique child with potential and a promising future. After having her baby, Charity married twice, but neither union was successful. One marriage was with a man named Brendan, but the circumstances of their breakup were not disclosed. In her desire to form a family, Charity started a relationship with a man named Jonathan, and at the age of 28, she became pregnant with her second child, the daughter. The news filled the family with joy, but initially, Paris did not seem happy about his mother's pregnancy, which worried Charity. However, once his sister was born, things changed. Paris fell in love with his sister, showing affection, protectiveness, and attentiveness towards her. Paris did not have many friends, and his little sister was his playmate. She was a loving, kind, intelligent, and very determined girl. From a young age, she demonstrated a compassionate nature, even expressing a desire for her mother to adopt all of her children in the world. Her loved ones described her as a little girl with a strong personality, always speaking her mind. Over the years, the happy home that Charity dreamed of turned into a nightmare. Her partner had serious alcoholism problems and was a violent man. According to Charity, the relationship ended when her husband was stopped by a police officer, and when asked to exit his vehicle, he refused. The officer reached into the car, and the driver sped off, dragging the officer along. The officer then shot and injured him in the leg. When Charity learned about the incident, she decided she could not allow her children to live in such circumstances, and chose to separate. The young girl enjoyed her relationship with her brother, finding fun and inspiration in playing with him, seeing him as a role model, and wanting to follow in his footsteps. Paris also appeared to enjoy his time with his younger sister. Childhood videos and photographs showed him dancing, playing, and posing together, always smiling. In 2005, Charity and her children moved to Dallas, Texas, to be closer to Kyla, Charity's mother, who had been diagnosed with breast cancer. Charity was a loving mother, but the stress and anxiety from her partner's separation and disputes with her mother led her to relapse into drug use. During the 6 months that Charity was under the influence, Paris took on the role of the protective older brother, a situation that significantly changed his life. He no longer saw his mother as a loving figure, but as an unpleasant woman full of flaws and mistakes. Soon after, the three of them moved to Kyla's ranch in Seymour, Texas, where their lives became even more chaotic. It was during this time that a more emotionally unstable and violent side of Paris began to emerge. He had fits of rage, banging his head against the wall or throwing things on the floor to seek attention. However, Charity seemingly failed to interpret these signs. On one occasion, while living at Kyla's ranch, Paris broke a toy that his sister and a friend were playing with. Seeing this, Charity scolded and punished him. Minutes later, when his mother was away, Paris took a kitchen knife and ran out with it in his hand. Alarmed by the screams of one of the ranch workers, Charity and Kyla rushed to the scene and managed to disarm him after some struggle. Worried about her son and his violent outbursts, Charity took Paris to a psychiatric center. However, feeling that he was not given adequate attention, she decided to return home with her son. According to some accounts, there were other similar episodes later on. On one such occasion, Paris threatened his aunt and sister, leading Charity to take him again to a health center where he underwent various tests. The specialist told Charity that it was concerning for a child so young to have thoughts about harming others, recommending that she seek treatment for him. However, Charity did not take the psychiatrist's suggestions well, finding the evaluation erroneous and offensive, and disregarded the advice. Nonetheless, doubts about how to handle her son's situation lingered in her mind, and shortly after, the family moved to Abilene. Over time, Paris developed resentment towards his mother, leading to constant arguments between them. For Charity, although the changes in her son confused her, she didn't believe they were as serious as the psychologist had suggested. Unfortunately, she was mistaken. Then came February 4, 2007. That day, 13-year-old Paris was visibly upset with his mother from the morning. But as he was a teenager and fights between mother and son had become a daily occurrence, she didn't give it much thought. At that time, Charity was working at a well-known restaurant near Abilene and had hired a babysitter that day to help while she was at work. She thought she had faced worse things with Paris, and that, as in the past, everything would be resolved. So before leaving, she approached her son, kissed him, and told him she loved him. She had a demanding workday due to the Super Bowl. After midnight, around 12:30 a.m. on February 5, 2007, exhausted from the intense hours, Charity was cleaning tables at the restaurant, eager to finish her shift and return home to rest and see her children. That's when several police officers arrived at the establishment. As she went to find the manager, she heard her name mentioned in the office and felt terror. Confused and disoriented, she couldn't understand what was happening when an officer told her that her 4-year-old daughter was injured. Her immediate reaction was to ask what had happened and where her daughter was. Then, the officer informed her that her daughter had passed away. Unable to bear the shock, Charity fainted. There is nothing more terrifying for a mother than the death of a child. But the truth she heard from the police was much crueler and more painful than she could have imagined. While being taken by the police to the station, Charity asked about her son Paris, and an officer responded that they had him. This brief and stark answer made her realize her worst nightmare had come true. When she heard her daughter had died, she felt shattered. But learning that Paris was the perpetrator was like having those shattered pieces broken again. According to the police investigation, that night the babysitter had taken the kids out for Chinese food. They returned home and watched a children's movie. The little girl then went to her room to sleep, while Paris retreated to his because he had to finish his homework. It's unknown at what moment Paris decided to end his sister's life, but as a bright and manipulative teenager, around 10 at night, he managed to convince the babysitter she could go home, assuring her that his mother was on her way. With her absence, it would be easier for him to execute his plan. What happened once they were alone was a true scene of terror. Paris went to Ella's room, beat her, sexually abused the little girl, barely 4 years old, and suffocated her. Then, with a knife he had taken from the kitchen, he gave her 17 fatal stabs. Immediately after the attack, Paris picked up the phone and called a friend, engaging in a conversation about various topics. Roughly 2 minutes after ending this call, which lasted 6 minutes at 11:42 p.m., the teenager dialed 911. During the call with the emergency operator, Paris seemed desperate and distressed about the atrocious act he had just committed. When asked if the girl was bleeding, he admitted she was because he had inflicted several wounds on her. The operator instructed Paris to perform CPR while waiting for emergency services and provided the necessary directions. On the recording, Paris can be heard counting as if following the instructions, but investigators later concluded that he never attempted to revive her. This was deduced from the position of the little girl's body and the blood-stain patterns found at the scene. In an attempt to justify his actions, Paris told the operator that he had hallucinated and thought his little sister was a demon. Soon, the street outside was filled with police and paramedics. Paris was taken into custody and brought to the police station while the investigation began at their home. During interrogation, he again mentioned his demonic hallucinations, claiming he was sleeping with his sister and woke up to her face looking different, like a demon engulfed in flames. He said he thought she was possessed and attacked her in a panic attack. As Paris continued his account, however, he fell into contradictions. He mentioned feeling resentment towards his sister since her birth because he was no longer the center of attention. Initially, investigators thought jealousy might have motivated the attack, but then he revealed his original plan also included killing his mother when she returned home. After a long, confusing, and painful night, Charity arrived at the police station to see her son. The inconsolable mother was shattered but became emotional upon seeing Paris. She got up, hugged, and caressed him amid tears, showing him she was there for him. Paris's reaction, in contrast, was cold and emotionless. He simply sat and coldly asked her what she planned to do. When Charity broke down in tears asking what he meant, Paris reminded her that she had always said she could take someone's life if they harmed her children. His question was not out of fear, but rather a challenge. At that moment, Charity realized there was something very dark in her son. Following his arrest, Paris was charged with a murder but not tried as an adult, as the minimum age for adult prosecution in Texas is 14 years. Instead, he was charged in juvenile court and pleaded guilty to capital murder. Charity was left feeling confused and unsure of what to do next. Although Paris's defense team suggested he not plead guilty for Charity, this was unthinkable. She couldn't hate her son and wanted him to be held accountable for his actions, yet she also desperately sought to understand what had driven him to such extremes. While the prosecution aimed for a life sentence, his lawyer was preparing to secure the lightest sentence possible. As part of their efforts, the defense advised against Charity receiving mental health counseling, fearing that the prosecution might use the reports against Paris. Despite the traumatic ordeal she faced as the mother of both the victim and the perpetrator, she finally accessed counseling 2 years after the crime. She was diagnosed with severe post-traumatic stress disorder and depressive disorders. Charity lost 15 kilograms in 13 days, started self-harming, and harbored a strong desire to die. Nevertheless, she knew she had to be strong for Paris, whom she never stopped loving despite the circumstances. In the months following, Paris was in complete isolation. He didn't speak and communicated only through letters and drawings. 2 months before his sentencing, Paris began to reject simple instructions and became more violent. On one occasion, he repeatedly hit a fellow inmate in the face and received a warning for making derogatory comments about other inmates. He later flooded his cell and confronted guards who came to see what was happening. During evaluations, he referred to the crime against his sister with a smile on his face. Prison staff reported that Paris repeatedly tried to manipulate them into giving him his mother's address. At one point, Texas Department of Justice officials said he had hacked the jail's computer system, though the intent was unclear. During this time, 2 psychologists evaluated Paris, and a third reviewed the case. Each report described the boy as showing marked antisocial behavior, reduced empathy, and remorse. The first specialist wrote that he had a moderate risk of developing traits characteristic of psychopathy and pathological narcissism. The second asserted that the teenager displayed all the characteristics of a psychopath. The third went further, suggesting to Charity that she change her identity and move somewhere Paris could never find her. Paris was sentenced to 40 years in prison with the possibility of parole after 20 years, which is the maximum sentence for capital murder in a Texas juvenile court. Had he been an adult, he would have faced the death penalty. Paris will be eligible for parole for the first time in February 2027. If he is never granted parole, he will be released in February 2047, by which time he will be over 50 years old. 2 years after his sentencing, Paris made chilling and macabre confessions about his motivations. He revealed that his original plan was to take the life of his mother, Charity, but after much thought, he realized he wanted to make her suffer in a way that killing her would not achieve. By taking away her young daughter, Ella, he knew Charity would suffer for the rest of her life. In 2013, 6 years after losing Ella, Charity became pregnant and decided to raise her new baby, Phoenix, on her own. Despite still being devastated by the loss of her beloved Ella, Phoenix brought life, joy, and a renewed will to move forward back into her life. However, Phoenix's arrival was not without challenges. He was born with a defective heart valve and had to undergo open-heart surgery. Fortunately, he recovered successfully. When Paris learned of his mother's pregnancy, he sent her a letter expressing his happiness, even though he knew he would never be able to meet his half-brother in person due to legal restrictions preventing convicted felons from contacting minors under 17 years of age. This restriction was a relief for Charity, who never brought Phoenix to the prison. Although Paris and Phoenix never met in person, they talked over the phone when Charity called her eldest son. Despite trying to handle these interactions naturally, Charity always harbored the fear of doing something that might put Phoenix in danger from his brother. In 2013, at the age of 19, Paris was transferred to an adult prison. 6 years later, in 2019, he gained significant attention after an interview with journalist Piers Morgan. In the interview, a calm 26-year-old Paris claimed he never felt he achieved any goal by killing his sister. He expressed being completely different from the person he was at the time of the murder and acknowledged the deep hatred he once felt for his mother, though he admitted to harboring thoughts of committing a crime since he was very young. Paris' story inspired documentaries revealing his manipulative and narcissistic personality. However, he consistently insisted that he was not mentally ill. For a long time, Charity visited and communicated with Paris through letters and phone calls. She shared her story with various media outlets, explaining that after her daughter's death, nothing made sense anymore, marking the end of the life she knew. Reflecting on the past, she regretted relapsing into drug use, believing it injured Paris, but she did not regret how she raised him. In 2021, Charity declared that she had ceased all communication with Paris. This decision came after learning he had become involved with a woman on bail living 2 hours from her home. Charity acknowledged that while she still loved Paris as her son, she did not like the man he had become. Following the tragedy, Charity established a foundation named Ella in honor of her daughter, which also stands for empathy, love, lessons, and action in English. Through this initiative, she advises families of both victims of violent crimes and offenders. Having experienced both sides of such tragedies, first as a child when her mother was accused of her father's murder, and later as a mother when Paris committed his crime, Charity understands the profound impact violent crimes have on families. She feels that the best way to honor her daughter, Ella, is by helping others navigate adversity, regardless of which side of the story they are on. This foundation serves as a testament to her commitment to supporting those affected by violent crimes and creating a platform for healing and understanding. Charity's work aims to provide guidance and support to those facing similar challenges, helping them to find a path forward amidst the turmoil and pain caused by such life-altering events. After 13 years working, Charity decided to shut down the Ella Foundation to focus on her son, Phoenix. Sarah Yarborough was born on June 12, 1975, in Portland. Her parents soon moved to another state, settling in Federal Way, a suburb outside of Seattle. Sarah had 2 siblings and was particularly close to her youngest brother. From a young age, she had a passion for music and ballet. She worked hard in school with the goal of attending a good university. Her academic achievements led her to participate in a school program that took her to New Zealand twice. Later on, Sarah joined her high school's cheerleading team and had a wide circle of friends. She was known for her kindness and willingness to help others in need. On the morning of Saturday, December 14, 1991, When she was 16 years old, Sarah had a gathering with her cheerleading team for an event. They were supposed to meet at the school building where the bus would pick them up. She drove her father's car to the school but arrived at the wrong time. She thought the bus would pick them up at 8 a.m., but it was scheduled for 9 a.m. Her friends gradually arrived at the meeting point, but Sarah was nowhere to be seen. Some students noticed her car in the parking lot, but she wasn't inside. She didn't appear even when the bus arrived for the students. Her friends found this strange, but back then, none of them had mobile phones, so they couldn't contact her. Around the same time, two 12-year-old children were walking on the school grounds, exploring the wooded area behind the tennis courts. They noticed something unusual. A man emerged from behind the bushes, took a breath, and walked away in the opposite direction. The children found it odd, but didn't pay much attention and continued walking. A few meters ahead, they encountered a horrifying sight. A young woman lying on the ground, unresponsive. They thought she might be dead. The children ran home to tell their parents, and one of the children's parents went back to the scene with them. The other child's father decided to follow the suspicious man they had seen earlier. The child mentioned seeing a car that resembled a Chevrolet Nova leaving the area. Since he lived near the school, his father decided to try to locate that car. At one point, he spotted a similar car but quickly lost sight of it, unable to find it again. Meanwhile, the parents of the other child went to the school and realized that the young woman on the ground was likely deceased. They immediately rushed to the school building and called the police. Officers arrived at the scene and confirmed that the young woman was indeed deceased. They were also able to quickly determine that the deceased was Sarah. The police concluded, based on the marks on her neck, that the victim had been strangled. Some of her belongings were found near her body, including her jacket, underwear, and socks. Strangely, her purse and car keys were discovered in the school parking lot, leading investigators to suspect that the assailant might have attacked her near her car and then dragged her behind the trees. The body was handed over to forensic experts, and the police began their search for clues. Their initial step was to interview all the people who were in the school premises and its vicinity. Two boys who had found Sarah provided a rough description of the man who had emerged from behind the bushes near her body. They described him as a tall man around 20 years old, with shoulder-length reddish hair, dressed in a dark coat and black pants. Soon, the police managed to locate another witness, and here is where a surprising twist in the story unfolds. The man who had gone for a run observed a strange scene in the same wooded area. A girl was lying next to the bushes, and a man was hovering over her. The girl showed no movement at all, and the witness initially thought that a couple had decided to be intimate in that spot. A few minutes later, he ran on the same road in the opposite direction, and both the man and the girl were still there. In both instances, it did not appear to him that a serious crime was being committed. The witness explained to the police that he had recently immigrated to the United States from another culture and was unsure of the typical behavior in the country. Nevertheless, this witness provided the police with a rough description of the assailant, which matched the descriptions given by the children who discovered the body. Investigators interviewed dozens of people who had been near the school but did not find any other useful leads. Meanwhile, medical experts examined Sarah's body and concluded that the cause of her death was strangulation. Apparently, the assailant had used his own socks, and a severe head wound was also found on the girl. Experts believed that the victim had lost consciousness due to this blow, which aligned with the runner's account of seeing the girl lying motionless on the ground. Forensic experts examined Sarah's clothing and found traces of male particles on nearly all of her garments. However, in 1991, there was no DNA database to compare these samples to, so investigators could only rely on direct comparisons of DNA samples from specific suspects. There was another lead that detectives pointed out. although forensic experts found traces of male particles on Sarah's clothing. The forensic doctor stated that there were no signs of sexual assault on her body. With all this information in hand, investigators formed their own opinion of what had happened. Sarah had arrived at the school nearly an hour early, and there was no one else in the parking lot but her. It was most likely that her assailant saw her there, waited for her to exit the car, struck her in the head with an object, causing her to lose consciousness. He then dragged her out of the parking lot behind some trees, where her body would later be found. The assailant had removed some of her clothing and engaged in lewd acts before strangling her with her own socks. When one of the children who discovered Sarah's body reported the car in which the assailant had supposedly fled, detectives initiated a search for a Chevrolet Nova. They quickly found one, but it turned out that the driver of that car had just delivered donuts that morning and provided his DNA sample, which did not match the DNA found on Sarah's clothing. It appeared that the children had simply seen the vehicle driving on the road next to them and mistakenly thought the perpetrator was behind the wheel. In fact, none of the children could remember with exact certainty if they had seen a man approach a car from the bushes. Over the following days, the police officers continued to search for witnesses and new leads, but there were no significant breakthroughs. Classes resumed on Monday, despite the horror that had occurred. Apart from the fact that the murder had taken place just a few meters from their school, the perpetrator remained at large, and his identity was unknown. The girls were afraid to walk alone on the premises, so the boys from the sports teams took it upon themselves to accompany each female student to their car or bus to ensure they weren't left alone on the street. Investigators learned that there were approximately 70 potential witnesses of the school and its surroundings that morning, and they interviewed each one of them, but no new details emerged. Based on the accounts of the two children and the runner, a sketch of the assailant was created and distributed to all local newspapers and television stations. The story received extensive media coverage, and in the weeks that followed, the police received hundreds of tips. Investigators diligently checked each and every one of them, but in every case, they hit a dead end. At one point, they received a lead on a man who matched the murder suspect's description and had a criminal record. However, the detectives were unsuccessful in this lead as well, as his DNA did not match the sample found on the victim's clothing. Since then, the case remained stagnant for months. The police received a total of 4,000 different tips and attempted to work with each one of them, but the resources of the local police department were simply insufficient to handle the volume of information. Time was also working against them, as new cases required the investigators' attention every month. When Sarah's family discovered that the police lacked the resources to manage all the tips, they tried to help as much as they could. One family member worked for a technology company and convinced the company's management to temporarily provide the police department with a powerful computer valued at $150,000. In the 1990s, this was a substantial sum, but the company agreed. With this computer, the police could store information on all the leads in one place, process them more quickly, and categorize them for easy review. Despite their efforts, each lead led to a dead end, and they made no progress in the following years. 2 years later, Sarah's classmates graduated, and before their graduation, they decided to commemorate their friend by raising a significant amount of money and using it to create a memorial. It was a bench where Sarah's belongings were cast in metal. Alongside these items was a photo of the girl's dog reaching for her purse. Over the years, the case was periodically reopened, re-examining all available evidence, but the outcome remained the same. They still couldn't get closer to capturing the perpetrator. During this time, the police interviewed several thousand people and collected DNA samples from almost 300 possible suspects, but all efforts were in vain. In 2011, 20 years after the murder, one of the detectives decided to turn to modern technology. He had heard about a company working in the field of genetic genealogy. The detective contacted them and asked, "Can you try to locate the relatives of the person who left their DNA on the victim's body?" The experts took on the task, but unfortunately, they failed. Firstly, in 2011, genetic genealogy was just beginning to gain momentum, and the experts were limited in their capabilities. For example, they couldn't yet search for both male and female relatives within the same sample. If they had DNA from a man, they could only search for familial connections with other men, and vice versa. Secondly, they faced legal obstacles in the form of various laws that prohibited the use of genetic data samples to search for relatives of suspects. However, their efforts did yield some interesting results. On one hand, the team of researchers that the detective approached had been working for several years on creating a genetic pedigree of the first people who arrived in the United States from Britain in 1620 on the Mayflower. After studying the DNA of Sarah's assailant, they discovered that the man was related to one of the ship's passengers, Robert Fuller. However, tracking him through this lineage was nearly impossible, especially in those years. The Mayflower carried just over 100 people, but over the centuries, the number of their descendants has surpassed 25 million. Secondly, the detective had no idea that he had turned Sarah's case into the first of its kind, even though his initial attempt was unsuccessful. It was the first crime that was attempted to be solved with the help of genetic genealogy. The detective tried to utilize the available information and located several men with the last name Fuller who lived in the area of his city at the time of Sarah's murder. He found photos of them and met with the only witnesses, a runner and two men who had found the body when they were children. Unfortunately, none of them recognized the murderer from the photos. Finally, the investigator requested DNA samples from all the Fullers in the area, and they were sent to the laboratory. None of them matched the DNA of the assailant, but something interesting happened here. The experts discovered that one of these men was indeed a distant descendant of Robert Fuller from the same Mayflower ship. However, he was definitely not the murderer, nor did he know of any distant relative living nearby. It's possible that the perpetrator of the crime was related to him through such a distant relative that their family simply never knew of the connection. The detective retired in 2017, and the case was handed over to a new team of investigators. They reached out to the company that had taken over the study of the DNA sample from the assailant in 2011. By then, the capability to study genetic material had advanced significantly, and the experts agreed to try to trace the assailant's lineage. It took them 2 years of painstaking work, using public databases to find even the most distant relatives of the assailant, then manually tracing their family connections to individuals who lived during the time of Sarah's death. In total, they had to eliminate several thousand individuals before they finally got a break. In September 2019, they came up with 2 new possible suspects, brothers Edward and Patrick Nicholas, who, as the DNA showed, were descendants of Robert Fuller. The experts determined that it was highly likely that a DNA sample from Sarah's clothing belonged to one of 2 brothers. At the time of the murder, one was 33 years old and the other was 27. The older brother turned out to be a career criminal with an extensive history of violent offenses. He had been in prison, and his DNA sample was in the FBI database, which meant he had nothing to do with Sarah's murder because his DNA would have shown a match in the 1990s if he were the perpetrator. As for the younger brother, named Patrick Nicholas, he had also been arrested multiple times by the police for violent crimes, including against minors. However, this was before the DNA samples of such offenders were added to the database. The detectives immediately placed the man under surveillance. Patrick, who was 55 years old at the time, lived in a neighboring city called Wellington. The police had been following his every move for 2 days, and soon, an opportunity presented itself. Patrick went to the laundromat, and while waiting for his clothes to wash, he stepped outside to smoke and discarded a cigarette butt on the ground. One of the officers immediately collected it in an evidence bag and returned to his car. Patrick stepped out to smoke for a second time, and this time, a cloth handkerchief fell out of his pocket. The officers pick it up. The police settled for taking the second piece of evidence in case the experts couldn't extract a DNA sample from the cigarette butt. However, the forensic experts were able to easily obtain samples from all these items, and the following day, they delivered the long-awaited news to the detective. Patrick's DNA was a perfect match with the traces found on Sarah's clothing in 1991. The judge immediately issued an arrest warrant for the man, and the police took him into custody. It took 5 days for the investigators to ascertain his name before formally charging him with murder. When his biography was leaked to the media, many began to ask a perfectly logical question. Why was a man with such a history of criminal activity not even considered a suspect for all these 28 years? At the age of 19, Patrick Nicholas approached a young woman and got into her car, where he attempted to assault her. The victim managed to escape and flee, but she had to jump into a river and swim for a long time to reach a safe distance from her assailant. Patrick spent 4 years in prison before being released. The next offense for which he was arrested occurred in 1994 when he tried to assault a minor. He was detained again, but his DNA was not recorded in any database. The reason is peculiar. The charge for which he was prosecuted was not serious enough to collect DNA, and the police never came across his name in 3 decades. He also did not appear in any of the 4,000 leads obtained over the years. It was also revealed why genetic genealogy experts couldn't trace him back to Robert Fuller. It turned out that Patrick's biological lineage was adopted, and he grew up with the adoptive surname. One of the men who discovered Sarah's body when they were children in 1991 immediately asserted that Patrick was undoubtedly the same killer. He admitted that the incident had deeply affected him. He was only 12 years old when the body was discovered, and the perpetrator had seen his face. For many years, the witness lived in constant fear that the killer would come after him, and only after Patrick's arrest did he finally feel safe. Patrick's trial did not begin until 2023. The man insisted he was innocent, and his lawyer attempted to challenge the main piece of evidence, the DNA. He argued that the presence of Patrick's DNA on the victim's clothing did not prove his guilt, but that argument did not hold. The lawyer also tried to challenge the accuracy of the DNA analysis, but the experts declared such claims to be entirely untenable. Ultimately, Patrick was found guilty of first-degree murder without premeditation. On May 25th, he was sentenced to 45 years and 8 months in prison, making it virtually impossible for him to ever be released. During the sentencing, Patrick showed no emotion, unlike Sarah's family. They also spoke before the judge, thanking everyone involved in the trial and the investigators for bringing the killer to justice, despite his ability to elude it for 28 years. It was in May 2002 in Australia, specifically in New South Wales, that Jamie and his wife Peta welcomed their firstborn. The arrival of their daughter was a source of immense joy not only for her parents, but also for her maternal grandmother, who was immediately captivated by the little girl's beautiful blue eyes. Her warm smile radiated happiness, enchanting everyone around her. The kids had a privileged childhood setting along those idyllic coasts with their mild temperatures, where the locals knew each other well. Indeed, Jamie and Peta had earned the esteem of their community, and by extension, Lily also became very beloved. Later, the family welcomed their second and final child, whom they named Max. Jamie worked as the water polo coach at a girls' school in the economic and business heart of Sydney. It was there that Lily pursued her studies. Throughout her time at school, she proved to be an outgoing girl with lots of friends. Lily was an exceptional student who enjoyed helping her peers with less academic dedication. This virtue, coupled with her good nature, won her the affection of many. As her younger brother grew up, the young girl also dedicated herself with patience and care to helping him overcome difficulties. Always brimming with energy, she was keen to learn swimming, and later, following in her father's footsteps, took up water polo, becoming an accomplished player. By the time she reached high school, she was recognized by all as one of the school's top students. Between her academic commitments and her numerous extracurricular activities, her teachers always saw her versatility and high level of achievement. These values were evident when the young girl not only joined the school's theater group, but also enrolled in dance classes. In reality, her dream was to excel in both disciplines, and she soon achieved this goal. It quickly became apparent that her performances blended dramatic expressiveness with the physical grace of dance. Knowing she possessed this talent, Lily prepared to participate in a festival. At this event, contestants had the opportunity to showcase their skills to the public and compete in various categories ranging from theater and dance to other artistic representations. Moreover, constructive feedback from qualified judges could help them improve their standards and also promote musical sponsorship within the community. Lily decided to perform a monologue from Macbeth, William Shakespeare's famous play, infusing it with her unique style. Instead of relying solely on dialogue and facial expression, she sought to convey the emotional journey of the main character through movement. The result was a harmonious combination that captivated the jury and earned her second place in the theatrical category. In the sporting arena, the talented young woman also earned amazing rewards, becoming the swimming champion in the under-17 category. As expected, Jamie and Peta were bursting with pride. For them, every achievement of their daughter was a cause for celebration. Like in 2018, when at just 16 years old, Lily passed her learner's driving test. Immediately, Peta and Jamie proudly shared the news on their social media. In 2020, during the high school graduation ceremony, Lily radiated light and happiness. Intelligent, beautiful, and possessing an independent spirit, the world opened up before her. By then, she had already decided to pursue a career in the sports world and enrolled at the University of Technology, Sydney, to study for a bachelor's degree in sports business management. In early 2021, with the start of classes, she took a part-time job as a water polo coach at St. Andrew's Cathedral School. From the beginning, the work experience turned out to be much more fascinating than the young woman had anticipated. With her vibrant personality, she managed to transform the classes into a unique fun space, winning over her students' affection. Her age also played in her favor, making her closer to the group, and everyone felt as if they had known her forever. Part of Lily's charm as a teacher was taking the time for details. For example, she wrote cards for each student, focusing on their personalities, beauty, and individual talents. It was there that Lily met Paul, the coach and sports assistant at the school. Born in 1999 in the Netherlands, Paul was the only child of a couple with a privileged economic position. The family moved to Australia in 2015 when the father was transferred to Sydney for work reasons. Once there, Paul enrolled in St. Andrew's Cathedral School, where he joined the cricket team. Over time, after earning the respect and admiration of his peers, he was appointed captain. He also actively participated in the school community by being part of the leadership team, contributing to the planning and execution of various events. However, not all his peers had a good opinion of him. Some considered him quite arrogant, and they were bothered by the way he approached girls, as if all were willing to fall in love with him. As it later emerged in 2017, once Paul graduated from high school, the institution offered him the opportunity to become an assistant coach for the cricket and hockey teams. He accepted the offer and, at the beginning of 2018, fully took over the role. In his new role, he was attentive and enthusiastic about motivating the students. However, under circumstances that have not been clarified, Paul returned with his parents to the Netherlands. During that time, he enrolled in a master's program to complement his sports knowledge. At the end of it, he gladly accepted an invitation to rejoin the sports department at St. Andrew's School. At the start of 2020, returning to the Australian dream, Paul reconnected with a former school and hockey mate. The two young men decided to share expenses and moved into an apartment in Kensington, a suburb located in the eastern area. As part of his duties at St. Andrew AS, he was tasked with welcoming the sports teams of other coaches after their respective classes, which included being aware of their schedules. This responsibility facilitated his interaction with Lily. In addition to his primary job, Paul joined the field hockey team at the University of New South Wales and also taught at a second institution. Despite these activities, he was quite a solitary person. Then on March 18, 2020, due to the coronavirus pandemic, the Australian Prime Minister declared a health emergency and imposed a strict quarantine. The restrictions affected all sectors, leaving Paul not only without anything to do, but also isolated from all human contact. He spent a total of 18 months in solitude in a city that, although familiar, felt somewhat foreign to him. Like many people around the world, this isolation affected his way of relating to others to some extent. By mid-September 2021, as the restrictions were lifted and things began to return to normal, Paul resumed his activities. He rapidly became an essential part of the hockey team, to the point where his image was used in promoting the games. Amid this period of openness, he had already shown a particular interest in Lily, with intentions that clearly went beyond mere friendship. However, according to the students, she was not the only one to whom the young coach dedicated his charming efforts. In fact, some of his students viewed him as someone who inappropriately flirted with the school's teenage girls. However, these concerns were not widely known. In fact, many considered him an essential part of the team. His exceptional performance was crucial in leading them to the final of the Sydney Hockey League, even though they were defeated in that match on September 9, 2023. A few days later, Paul finally gathered the courage to ask Lily out, and she accepted happily, unaware of any rumors about him. Their first date turned out much better than either had imagined, leading them into a passionate and swift romance. However, the intensity of their feelings did not make them overlook the importance of discretion, especially considering their work environment. Thus, they opted to keep their relationship private. Initially, Lily kept her part of the agreement. But Paul, on the other hand, couldn't resist boasting to his students and began to hint that he was dating her. As expected, the rumor gradually spread throughout the educational center until, in the first days of October 2023, Lily learned of his indiscretions and felt betrayed. For her, it was not a minor issue, as the way he bragged about their relationship left her exposed to criticism, leading to disappointment. The romance was just 5 weeks old, and if she couldn't trust him, she was determined to end it. She couldn't continue with someone like Paul. Despite his insistence and attempts at excuses and justifications, Lily made it clear there was nothing more to consider. It was definitively the end of any interaction between them. In a matter of hours, Paul's hurt from the breakup turned into anger, not at himself for breaking a promise, but at her for not forgiving him. Such anger led him to imagine various scenarios, all aimed at harming the young woman. He then decided to go to a hardware store and there chose what he considered the ideal weapon, a hammer. On October 25, 2023, Lily left her house and attended her university classes as usual. In the afternoon, she went to the school for another workday with her students. Meanwhile, Paul rented a silver car and arrived at the school in this vehicle. He didn't get out, he just stayed there, waiting patiently until the activities ended. Around 7 p.m., when the water polo students left, Paul finally made his way towards the institution's gym. In his hands, he carried the hammer. Once there, he saw Lily enter the bathroom and followed her. All his movements were recorded by the security cameras at the location. Inside the bathroom, with no witnesses, they argued. Everything happened very quickly, almost as swiftly as their brief love story had begun. Then, amidst the shouting, Paul managed to gain the upper hand and overpower Lily. The newly purchased tool was used to end her life. He then took the girl's backpack and cell phone, and about an hour later, he left the bathroom. This sequence was captured again by the surveillance cameras. Afterward, he drove to the area known as the Gap, known for its cliffs. As he walked around for the third time, Paul was recorded by security cameras. Meanwhile, Peta and Jamie tried repeatedly to contact their daughter to no avail. Desperate, they decided to alert the police. The authorities immediately took notice of the situation and began searching for Lily. Around 10 at night, Paul sent a text message from the young woman's phone, asking Jamie to pick her up at the school without giving further explanations. An hour later, the 24-year-old perpetrator made an anonymous call to emergency services, reporting a body in the St. Andrew's School gym and stating that the case needed investigation. After hanging up, he disposed of the hammer and Lily's backpack in a garbage bin. He then abandoned the rented vehicle and walked to the edge of one of the cliffs, jumping and ending his own life. When the police arrived at the school, following the anonymous call just before midnight, the institution was in complete and utter silence, the opposite of its usual bustling energy. In the gym, as soon as the officers saw the silhouette on the floor, they realized their worst fears had come true. Lily's body lay lifeless. However, due to the severe injuries she suffered, investigators were initially unable to identify her. In the course of the investigation, the officer's first task was to seize the gym's security camera footage. Next, the team traced the anonymous call. It became quite clear that whoever had made it was likely to provide more information. Some reports state that the first thing they determined was that the number belonged to Paul, and they began to call him insistently. They didn't suspect him at the moment, but wanted him to share everything he knew. Unfortunately, the young man did not respond to the calls. Shortly after, the investigators were able to locate where the call had been made from. Thus, in the early hours of the morning on Thursday, October 26, 2023, the police arrived at the Gap area and cordoned off the surroundings. After patrolling and conducting thorough searches, they discovered the hammer, which was immediately considered the fatal weapon. Finally, the agents found Paul's belongings. Around 4 in the morning, the police officers requested the school authorities to suspend classes until the investigation was concluded. This measure was communicated to all parents and guardians through a text message mentioning a critical incident, naturally causing panic to set in every home in the community. 2 hours later, a second considerably more reassuring message arrived because, by then, the school's management had decided to assure that no student was involved in the incident. However, after a sleepless night, Lily's parents received the devastating news of their daughter's cruel fate. Within minutes, the family's home was filled with neighbors and friends, all ready to offer as much support as possible in a situation no one could have ever imagined. Thanks to the gym's camera footage, the police identified Paul as the young man who had followed Lily. From there, authorities were able to outline the nature of the relationship between the main suspect and the victim, thus identifying a motive behind the crime. However, due to the lack of clues about his whereabouts, investigators began to consider the possibility that he might have taken his own life. Regardless, boats and even a helicopter were deployed along the coastline to find him. Through a statement, the police made the main suspect's name public, indicating that the nature of the injuries made it evident that Lily had been a victim of homicide. Although it was confirmed there were no previous domestic violence incidents between her and Paul. In the early hours of the next morning, Friday, October 27, 2023, a group of workers was preparing to start their day at a construction site near the top of one of the cliffs. However, they had to interrupt their work almost before it had begun when they were startled by the macabre sight of a body floating near the rocks. They immediately informed the police, who then established a new crime scene there and also organized a rescue team to recover the body. The unfavorable weather conditions made the already complicated operation even more difficult. Finally, by noon, the Marine unit achieved its goal with the assistance of a helicopter. The media was informed that the body was of an unidentified male victim, although officers had strong suspicions about his identity. Meanwhile, the remains were transported to the Forensic Medicine Service for a mandatory autopsy. The fingerprints collected were sent to the Embassy of the Netherlands for comparison with their records, leading to the identification of the man as Paul. That same afternoon, in their first public statement, Lily's family expressed the profound grief they were experiencing. Despite everything, they said, they were overwhelmed with immense gratitude for the community's support. Concurrently, given that the police investigation was ongoing, they opted to refrain from further comments. The director of the school also shared warm words of thanks to everyone for the love and support provided during these difficult times. She mentioned that Lily had always displayed qualities that made her unforgettable. Beyond the pain of loss, it was hard to overlook the fact that the tragedy occurred in a space where minors should feel protected. Aware of this, the school sent a letter to parents assuring them that, in the words of the police, the crime was unforeseeable. In response to the events, access to the gym was restricted for students, while the library was transformed into a walk-in psychological counseling center for students needing specialist help to cope with the impact. Amid the case's impact, a renowned local media outlet contacted a criminal psychologist and expert in criminal cases for an interview to help the public understand the dimensions of the occurred events. When asked about his impression of the facts, he stated that the victim's actions were typical of men with fragile egos, incapable of accepting rejection. However, he viewed the young man's relationship not merely as one of anger or hurt, but as malicious. He highlighted that there was no spontaneity, but a clear intention to harm, something that, in his opinion, was evident from the cruelty with which Paul sent messages pretending to be Lily, asking to be picked up when the young woman was already deceased. Overall, for the expert, Paul's was a narcissistic profile with psychopathic tendencies. Paul's parents decided not to repatriate their son's remains to their home country. Instead, they opted to cremate him and scatter his ashes on a Sydney beach. Lily's funeral took place on November 17, 2023. The more than 500 attendees were asked to wear bright colors and bring flowers, as Lily would have liked. Perhaps the most emotional moment of the day was when Jamie spoke heartfelt words for his beloved daughter and to all those who had gathered in her name. Although it took Lily's grandmother some time to express her feelings, she eventually encapsulated her thoughts about her granddaughter magnificently. She said Lily's brief life was enough to make a difference in many lives. Lucy Davies was born in 1971 in the county of Rhondda, England. She was the daughter of Roger and Andrea Davies, who were also the proud parents of another girl named Anna. The family was settled in a small community mainly formed by socially purposed housing. There, against the backdrop of beautiful mountain scenery, Lucy had a particularly happy childhood. Since she and her little sister had similar tastes, they were always very close. Her parents always highlighted Lucy's infectious joy as a standout quality. During her time in primary school, Lucy was known for her outgoing and likable temperament, which immediately endeared her to teachers and classmates alike. In addition to her charming personality, she was also recognized for her undeniable beauty, making her one of the most popular and admired girls at school. Regarding interests outside of academics, both she and Anna loved ponies. Knowing this, their father pleasantly surprised them by enrolling both in the local riding club. This sporting activity taught them discipline and also showcased their talent. Consequently, they earned the right to participate and represent the club in countless events and competitions. Thus, by the start of secondary school, Lucy shone as an exceptional rider. However, her energy and passion were not limited to the tracks, as the versatile young lady began to take flute and piano lessons, dedicating long hours to practice to master both instruments. Her efforts soon paid off, and by the following year, Lucy had a very comprehensive and detailed mastery of the wide field of classical music. Thanks to this, she was accepted into a youth orchestra and also joined her school's choir group. As often happens in this stage of adolescence, a healthy romantic interest appeared in her life, and Lucy became very close to Gareth Jenkins. However, she preferred to keep it a secret. In 1989, after finishing secondary school, Lucy was determined to pursue a career in the musical world. With that goal in mind, she enrolled to undertake a bachelor's degree at the University of Warwick. There, she began her new and promising life, always with the aspiration of becoming a teacher and dedicating herself to musical education. But things did not go as she had expected. While her passion remained, she did not enjoy the direction of the degree program. Consequently, she decided to switch her original plan and opted to study urban planning. It was around this time that she met Graham McAllister. They both discovered quite soon that their outlook on life was very similar. Aside from their love for art and shared interests, a crucial detail in their bond was the extravagant sense of humor that complemented each other. Their relationship flowed naturally, and as they made plans for the future, Lucy decided to introduce him to her parents. For Roger and Andrea, the meeting was wonderful, as they were certain that Graham was the right one for their daughter. So much so that they decided to buy Lucy a house in the city of Coventry, northwest of London. This gesture, in addition to ensuring her a life free from the upheavals of rent and moving, carried their wish for her to start a family. Shortly after moving in, Lucy invited her boyfriend to share the new home. As they continued with their studies in 1995, the young couple welcomed their first child, whom they named James. Lucy decided it was best to take a break from university to care for him. Meanwhile, Graham continued with his university commitments and, to support the household expenses, got a job working the night shift at the city's postal sorting office. Over the months, this dynamic began to affect Lucy, because alone at home, dedicated exclusively to the child, and with many hours away from her partner, a feeling of boredom took hold of her. Then, she found no better solution than to explore internet chat rooms for distraction. In this universe, she sought to meet new people. One night, while Lucy was immersed in lively conversations in various chat rooms, she came into contact with Harold Landry. At 53 years old and of American origin, Harold came from a financially struggling family in Louisiana. However, he understood early on that, being just one among a dozen siblings, he would have to achieve everything through his own effort and will. Thus, from a young age, he dedicated himself to hard work to escape poverty. His opportunity arrived when he realized that in the oil business, the key was not in owning a well, but in providing the essential infrastructure for the owners of such fields. Consequently, he founded his own company, focused exclusively on the design and manufacture of hydraulic equipment for major oil companies in the southern United States. As he had anticipated, The business allowed him to amass a great fortune, eventually reaching billionaire status. By that time, he divided his time between his eccentric hobbies and a property on the island of Cozumel in Mexico. On a personal level, he had been married and divorced twice. From these unions, he had children whose exact number and identities are not publicly known. What was known, however, was that Harold made sure they lacked nothing. A particularly relevant event occurred in 1992 when, being single again, he met a married woman 20 years his junior. However, neither her family nor her husband were obstacles for Harold, who directed all his seductive strategy towards her and won her over. On February 6, 1994, Harold picked her up to take her for a ride in New Orleans. For this occasion, they hired a babysitter. After concluding the evening, Harold accompanied his lover back to her home and offered to take the babysitter back to hers. No one seemed concerned about the fact that the husband would find out about the betrayal and could act as a wounded man. In fact, that's exactly what happened. Outside the residence, the betrayed husband was monitoring every move of his wife. Once the third party said goodbye, he followed him in his car. A few minutes later, Harold finally noticed the vehicle tailing him. Then, almost as an instinctive gesture, he opened the glove compartment and pulled out the firearm he usually kept. When both stopped at a red light, things spiraled out of control, as the babysitter later narrated. Harold then brandished a revolver at the betrayed husband and fired. The bullet severed an artery in his neck and damaged a nerve leading to a vocal cord. The husband, called Chris Price, collapsed on the pavement with a wound on his neck, but fortunately, there was a hospital right in front of them, which allowed him to receive immediate aid, and the doctors were able to save his life. As for Harold, he was arrested and charged with attempted murder. The trial against him took place in 1997. In his opening statement, the defense attorney told the jury that Chris had only been the victim of a tragic and sordid affair. Regarding his client, he mentioned that he acted out of fear and in self-defense. The defense's clever strategy led the jury, consisting of 4 men and 8 women, to find Harold guilty of the lesser charge of aggravated assault. As a result, he was sentenced to 5 years behind bars. After appealing, Harold obtained probation. In exchange, he had to pay a fine of $500 and fulfill community service obligations. Although he sought to be completely exonerated, he thanked Pat for his hard work. Since then, they became great friends. Shortly after, Harold and Chris agreed on an undisclosed settlement amount. By the time Harold began talking with Lucy, he was residing in Covington and was still wealthy enough not to have to work. He was also honest about his occupations and everything related to his past life, including love affairs and legal details. But all these elements only served to increase Lucy's attraction to him. What followed was an engaging online romance, with Harold promising her a more than tempting lifestyle. His persistence and persuasive power bore fruit when Lucy finally asked Graham to end their relationship. Thus, he had the path clear, without a rival that could cause him trouble, as had happened with Chris. With the wind in his favor in the early 2000s, Harold traveled to England to meet her, and she took the opportunity to introduce him to her parents as her boyfriend. Although Roger and Andrea were surprised by the significant age difference, they respected their daughter's decisions and did not object to the relationship. Feeling fulfilled and fortunate to share his life with her, Harold spared no effort to surprise her, whether with luxurious gifts or anything else Lucy desired. In fact, by then, he was so in love that he was already planning to propose marriage. However, he didn't want it to be just any proposal. He wished to do it in an ideal setting. To achieve this goal, he took her, along with her son James, and included Graham in the group on a trip. The chosen destination was Mexico, which for Harold was by then his favorite place in the world. Additionally, his longtime friend Pat, who had been his attorney in the past trial, also had an apartment close to his residence, which added to the feeling of comfort. Initially, Harold bought a diamond ring and shared the news with enthusiasm with Pat. Nonetheless, his friend harbored certain suspicions about his future fiancée. Moreover, over the days, Pat found it strange that Lucy had dedicated a good part of her time in the company of Graham. He seemed to be completely blind to it, and ultimately, he proceeded with his plan to propose. Lucy happily accepted the proposal, and in mid-2003, the couple celebrated their union. Shortly afterward, Harold surprised her by acquiring a $1 million property in an exclusive neighborhood in Worcestershire. In this rural setting, the marriage had a prosperous and peaceful start, further favored by the presence of excellent neighbors like Rachel Clark and Stephen Kennedy, with whom Harold and Lucy formed a lovely friendship. Soon, the newlyweds had their first daughter, whom they named Harriet. The event filled both Lucy and Harold with joy, and from then on, he dedicated himself to the little girl with undiminished energy and commitment. Equally important and affectionate was the relationship he maintained with James, whom he treated as if he were his own son. But relentless time began to erode their initial bliss. Gradually, the demands made towards Lucy increased, and her moodiness became directly proportional to her husband's demands. As he saw it, his wife was to constantly adjust to his preferences and adopt a submissive role to his requests. She, on the other hand, had different expectations, so tensions quickly became apparent. As a conclusion, Lucy was direct and unafraid to express her thoughts, and in this dynamic, her husband was not willing to yield. With both having volatile personalities, their arguments often culminated in explosive breakups, followed by reconciliation once the storm had passed. Thus, moments that had once been pleasurable, like the children's vacations, became increasingly marred by fights. Meanwhile, James witnessed the disintegration of his mother and stepfather's relationship. To their neighbors' dismay, the disputes that stretched on for hours became a sort of regular soundtrack. By that time, Rachel and Stephen were aware that the couple had a tendency to abuse alcohol, knowing well that this was the fuel that ignited their shouting and complaints. When Lucy and Harold unleashed all their anger, leading to prolonged periods of not speaking to each other, their neighbors felt peace return. In mid-2009, thanks to social media, Lucy reconnected with Gareth. Having had no contact since their platonic love in secondary school, they caught up and chatted for hours, with necessary interruptions due to both of their commitments. After Harold went to sleep, his wife stayed in front of the screen. Soon, it became evident to him that, feeling unhappy, his wife had resorted to the same escape route through which she had found him, and he had no doubt she was looking for a replacement. However, far from confronting her, he considered giving her some space and traveled to Mexico, where he stayed for a while. Meanwhile, Lucy took the opportunity to invite Gareth to stay with her. In the autumn of 2009, her husband returned to England, thinking this time would resolve their marriage. But as soon as he stepped into the house, Lucy asked him for a divorce. Initially, he felt devastated. Then, after a few weeks, Harold began a relationship. He met this new woman online. She lived in the vicinity and went by the name of Rachel. Parallel to each of their new romances, the divorce negotiations were underway, and as often happens, new conflicts emerged. Especially concerning the house, Lucy expected to keep it to ensure a roof over her children's heads. For Harold, on the other hand, this matter was non-negotiable. His solution was to offer her money to buy herself a more modest apartment on her own. At the same time, he completely excluded her from his will. Upon learning of the decisions of her still husband, Lucy flew into a rage. Her feelings of hatred towards him made her share everything about Harold's past with her son James, not leaving anything out. Amidst the complicated process and considering the evident tension she was living in, Gareth invited her to spend a few days with him in Wales. Upon her return to familiar surroundings, Lucy no longer wished to disguise or hide her lengthy phone conversations with her new love. Meanwhile, both she and Harold were immersed in excessive alcohol consumption. The arguments escalated to unexpected heights, leaving the children at the mercy of a violent and unbearable atmosphere. On the afternoon of Monday, February 1st, 2010, Harold drank several glasses of wine. At one point, he received a package intended for Stephen. Around 9 o'clock at night, when Stephen returned from work, he found a postal notification indicating that his parcel had been delivered to his neighbor. The Landry's lights were on, so he went there. Harold invited him in and served him a glass of wine. After greeting Lucy and exchanging a few words, Stephen noticed how drunk his host was. He took his package, excused himself, and left. Subsequently, the couple engaged in a nonsensical argument, specifically over a furniture purchase she was planning for their move. James acted as the years of fights had taught him. This time, the disagreement escalated to a physical altercation. In the scuffle, Harold grabbed a kitchen utensil with which he struck Lucy on the cheek. Unable to continue avoiding the facts, James appeared at the scene of the dispute and found his mother injured. He immediately called the police and then focused on securing his younger sister's safety. Not long after, Lucy and her children left the house seeking help. The first place she thought to go was to Stephen's house. However, just as she headed in that direction, Harold caught up to her and, with a knife, caused her multiple injuries. Then he left her under a bush in the garden and walked away. Alerted by the screams, Stephen went outside. It only took him a few steps to discover his neighbor. Although he initially thought she was unconscious, he quickly understood the severity of the situation. At that moment, responding to the emergency call, the police arrived at the scene. They called the paramedics and searched the vicinity for the perpetrator. However, they only found the children, hidden and terrified in the backyard amidst the darkness. Once on site, the paramedics acted as quickly as possible, and Lucy was transported to the hospital. Very shortly after, her heart stopped. Meanwhile, Harold went to Rachel's house and confessed that something terrible had happened, but without giving further details. He then gave her 3 bank drafts totaling $40,000, a sum of cash, the keys to his car, and several signed blank checks. Then he set off back home. By that time, several police patrols were trying to locate him. Eventually, they found him walking along the road and proceeded to arrest him. Roger and Andrea were overwhelmed with despair upon hearing the tragic news. In a statement shared by the police, they asked for respect during their time of unimaginable sorrow from losing their daughter. For now, they had nothing more to say to the media. From then on, all their attention was focused on looking after their grandchildren. The forensic examination confirmed that Lucy had died as a result of multiple stab wounds to the chest. With this evidence and having James as a first-hand witness on February 5, 2010, Harold appeared before the court and was charged with murder. The trial took place in early February 2011. It was presided over by Judge David Foskett. On this occasion, Pat was not the defender of his friend. That task fell to attorney Andy Childs. Despite the evident difficulty of his task, the defense attorney argued that his client had been provoked by the fury of his wife, who left him no alternative but to act as he did. During his initial statements from the stand, Harold, amidst sobs, stated that he loved Lucy and regretted his actions. He then adhered to the strategy laid out by his lawyer, admitting to involuntary manslaughter because, in his words, Lucy had pushed him to the limit. To highlight the violence of the case, The prosecution presented a very detailed animation of the multiple injuries suffered by the victim. This presentation was shocking to those present in the courtroom. Finally, on February 24, 2011, after less than 4 hours of deliberation, the jury found Harold Landry guilty of the murder of his wife, Lucy Landry, who was 38 years old at the time of her death, while Harold was 64. The following day was for the judge to impose the sentence. He had harsh words for Harold, whose attack he described as indescribable and unforgivable. He also dismissed Harold's claims of possible provocation by Lucy, considering them a vain attempt by the defendant to save himself. Consequently, he was sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 16 years before being eligible for parole. By that time, however, he would be over 80 years old. Lucy's loved ones thanked not only for the resolution, but also for the judge's remarks, which they felt almost perfectly expressed what they themselves felt. They noted that the sentence somehow helped alleviate the pain of their loss, although they also admitted that no number of years in prison for Harold would bring back Lucy's life, so they would have to work on accepting this painful reality. For his part, Harold insisted on proclaiming his innocence, as he was heard saying he hoped to be able to appeal the sentence in the future. Rossana Galliano was having dinner with her sister Monica in the living room of her house in El Remanso Exaltación de la Cruz when her phone rang. It was her husband, Jose Arts, calling to say he was running late to pick up their sons, Geronimo and Nehuen, ages 4 and 3. Rossana answered the call, but, struggling to hear, stepped out into the garden to talk. As she tried to communicate with Jose, a figure emerged from the trees, took a few steps toward her, and pulled out a gun. The assailant fired 6 shots, leaving 29-year-old Rossana's body just steps from her home, struck by 4 bullets. Rossana Galliano was born in the late 1970s in Buenos Aires, Argentina. She was the youngest child, with 2 brothers named Oscar and Gustavo, and a sister named Monica. Her parents were Reynaldo and Graciela. The details of her childhood and teenage years are a bit of a mystery, but it's known that she finished high school in the late 90s. During this time, Rossana's dad, Reynaldo, worked as a mechanic. Early in 2001, Jose Arts showed up at Reynaldo's workshop. Jose was born on November 22, 1948. He had lived abroad for over 30 years, in places like Greece and the United States, where he even spent 4 years in prison for drug trafficking. Eventually, Jose returned to Argentina in 1996, owning 8 properties in a posh area of Buenos Aires. Jose and Rossana met when he brought his vintage car for repairs at her father's shop. Despite the significant age difference, they started dating quickly. At that time, Rossana was unemployed and quite reserved. Jose appeared to be financially stable, but in reality, his wealth came from his mother, Elsa, who was still in the United States. When Jose, at the age of 52, proposed to 22-year-old Rossana, her mother Graciela questioned if he was too old for her daughter. Jose argued that love knew no age. Looking for assurance, Graciela turned to Rossana, who, in a whisper, confirmed her desire to marry him. The couple got married on November 17, 2001, after just 7 months of dating. Jose claimed that his cheerful, modern, and smart personality won Rossana over. Soon after, they had a son named Geronimo. But not long after, problems began to show. Jose was a controlling and jealous man who often belittled Rossana and her family. This abuse eventually became physical, leaving Rossana feeling trapped and fearful. Jose's intimidating presence, reinforced by owning 2 guns, ensured he kept control, a situation that Rossana's family was painfully aware of. It was common for Jose to show off his guns, either when someone visited their home or when he was out visiting others. One time, while painting their house, Rosana's brother Oscar witnessed Jose physically assaulting her, telling her to shut up before hitting her. On another occasion, her father noticed bruises on Rosana's back, and she simply told him that Jose had dragged her across the pavement. Despite these troubles, Rosana and Jose welcomed their second child, and Rosana tried her best to make the relationship work, hoping to provide a stable home for their children. However, her efforts were constantly undermined by Jose's temper and disrespectful behavior. To make matters worse, Jose's mother, Elsa, controlled the household from afar, making decisions about their lives during her short visits to Argentina. By 2006, Rosana had endured unbearable abuse and finally reported Jose for domestic violence. Her family was largely unaware of the full extent of her suffering. Months later, Rosana filed a second complaint, including a request for a medical examination due to her injuries. Following this, she opened up to her sister Monica, and they made a pact to communicate whenever something happened. Monica became her sanctuary and support. Whenever life with Jose became unbearable, Rosana would visit Monica's apartment with her children, though Jose dictated when they must return, often with death threats. At times, he verbally abused Rosana, criticizing her abilities as a mother. Eventually, she decided to move in with Monica and the children, while Jose stayed at his house. After some time, Rosana filed another complaint and sought a divorce, resulting in a restraining order against Jose. They only met at a neutral property in El Remanso, Exaltación de la Cruz, for child visitation, as arranged by the court. It was there that Rosana shared the extent of her ordeal with the gardener. Daniel Gonzalez, who lived nearby, was married and had a daughter. Rumors suggested a secret romance between Rosana and Daniel, but this was never confirmed. Jose's threats continued, and Rosana even played a voicemail for her brother Oscar in which Jose talked about killing her. In mid-2007, while hanging out with friends at a bar, Rosana met Oscar Lugo. He was 32, lived in Marino, and worked in a sewing workshop. They hit it off immediately, exchanged numbers, and started dating. Oscar Lugo was old-fashioned, a gentleman who was kind, attentive, and listened to her. For 29-year-old Rosana, who had been through endless turmoil, it felt like she was rediscovering a nearly forgotten life. Oscar Lugo noticed Rosana's lack of confidence and the fear in her. By December 2007, he had joined her for the holiday festivities, even dressing up as Santa Claus to delight her sons. But the happiness was marred by Jose, who kept tabs on Rosana's every move. Aware of her new relationship and panicked by the looming divorce, Jose called Rosana, offering her a truck to end things with Oscar Lugo. She refused, and it was her new boyfriend who accompanied her to the hospital during a severe nervous breakdown. Out of options, Jose hatched a plan, financed by his mother, Elsa. They meticulously arranged to hire a hitman whose identity remains a mystery. On January 16, 2008, Rosana and her sister Monica went to El Remanso to pick up her sons, age 4 and 3. The handover was delayed by Jose with excuses. At 9:15 p.m., Jose called, claiming Geronimo had a fever and he would take him to the hospital and return him the next day. However, Rosana insisted on having the children back to care for Geronimo herself. The call was brief, and then she went inside. Around 9:53 p.m., Rosana texted Oscar Lugo with a casual message about their plans for the next day. At 10 p.m., Rosana and Monica sat down for dinner. At 10:50 p.m., Jose called again, and this conversation turned into a deadly trap. Rosanna went out to the garden for better reception, where a shadowy figure emerged from behind the trees and shot her 4 times with a .45 caliber gun. Hearing the shots, Monica screamed, saw Rosanna stagger and collapse. Frantic, Monica tried calling 911 without success, then asked her boyfriend to alert the police. Meanwhile, Oscar Lugo, unaware of the events, tried contacting Rosanna at 11 p.m. and failing that, tried to reach Monica but got no response. Police investigations revealed that the shooter had entered from an adjacent vacant lot. A witness saw someone fleeing through a gap in the fence but couldn't provide a clear description due to the darkness. That night, Jose was questioned and appeared shocked. After requesting a lawyer, he let the lawyer handle the proceedings and left. The next day, during further searches, a red sweater was found, which Rosanna's relatives believed belonged to Jose, making him the prime suspect in their eyes. The case grabbed media attention and shocked the country, becoming scandalous as Jose and his mother publicly claimed his innocence and talked bad about Rosanna, suggesting she had multiple lovers and those men should be investigated instead. After the incident, Daniel, the gardener, became reclusive, speaking to no one. On the night of Rosanna's funeral, Reynaldo noticed Jose nearby in a truck, watching from a distance without joining or expressing condolences. Jose's defense later targeted Monica, Rosanna's sister and the sole witness, raising doubts about her by questioning why there were no bloodstains on her clothes and why she ran for her phone instead of helping her sister. However, this theory was unsupported. The investigators argued the weapon was too heavy for a woman to manage. An important point raised by the detectives was that anyone familiar with the house would know Rosanna needed to go outside to get a cell signal, indicating significant premeditation in the crime. During the investigation, Rosanna's sons were cared for by their father and grandmother Elsa, while their grandmother Graciela could see them. However, Monica and Oscar were denied access, with Jose claiming serious safety concerns for his sons. Despite the legal restrictions, the children expressed a desire to see their Aunt Monica, leading Jose to occasionally allow visits. Monica used these opportunities to take them to a psychologist. Eventually, Graciela obtained visitation rights, though not guardianship. In an interview at the time, Jose alleged that Rosanna had 4 lovers, all with legal troubles. According to Jose, Rosanna was intimate with these men to uncover their secrets, which she then used to blackmail them for benefits. Meanwhile, after receiving threats, Oscar was made a protected witness in his sister's case, requiring him to wear a tracking bracelet and being assigned police protection. As 2007 was ending, the investigators had yet to find solid evidence to charge any of the suspects. However, a significant turn came a year after the murder when Jose was arrested in January 2008, charged with aggravated homicide due to their relationship, premeditation, and the involvement of 2 or more people. The preliminary hearings began on January 28, 2008. Reynaldo, Graciela, Monica, and Oscar testified about Jose's repeated threats, violent nature, and use of firearms for intimidation. The mother also presented the last text messages from her daughter to the prosecutor. After the hearing, Reynaldo expressed feeling a heavy burden but found relief in fulfilling his duty to his daughter's memory. The next day, Oscar Lugo, Rosanna's former boyfriend, testified against Jose, describing him similarly to the family's view. He mentioned Jose's attempts to tarnish his and Rosanna's reputations, adding that Rosanna believed Jose's claims of her having multiple lovers were a tactic to discredit her in their impending divorce. Jose's lawyer downplayed the allegations of Jose's emotional instability and aggression, suggesting they were echoing Roxana's narrative. On February 7, 2008, a 12-hour investigative session took place, with José's mother traveling from the United States for her turn to testify. Meanwhile, a new search at El Remanso yielded no new evidence. By then, Roxana's family suspected her mother-in-law's involvement in the plot. As a result, Reynaldo and Graciela's lawyer considered requesting her arrest. In defense, José and his mother's lawyer argued that José's mother had stated in her testimony that she bought houses for her grandchildren, believing the divorce settlement would not harm them. It was also added that it was untrue that José's mother and Roxana had a bad relationship. The media continued to debate the circumstances of Roxana's death and the notion that José orchestrated the murder, hinting at another perpetrator. Despite the suspicions, José was released on bail and took care of his children. Later, the court deemed the police protection for Oscar, Roxana's brother who worked as a taxi driver, unnecessary. On the early morning of July 5, 2008, Oscar was attacked by two armed men. They beat and threatened him for an hour before abandoning him in a vacant lot, where he was found thanks to his protective witness tracking bracelet. Though not severely injured, he was deeply shaken. Amidst the grief of losing Roxana and the ongoing custody battle, the family faced renewed fear, a fear that was palpable and justified. With no one convicted and ongoing threats, the demand for justice grew more urgent, yet the judicial system's slow pace was disheartening. Years passed, and by 2012, the trial and custody dispute dragged on. 4 years after the attack, Oscar used his visitation rights to take his nephews to play soccer, sharing a memorable hug with the 6- and 7-year-old boys. In April 2013, the oral trial started. José maintained his innocence. In May, proceedings were delayed when José suffered a stroke, pushing the final verdict to November 2013. The judges found that the murder was meticulously planned, resembling organized crime. José and Elsa were implicated in choosing the time and place for the attack, knowing that a phone call would lure Roxana outside, making her vulnerable. The court found financial motives behind the murder, as José did not want to split the marital assets. José and Elsa were sentenced to life imprisonment. The conviction was upheld by the higher court, highlighting José's threats, the domestic violence endured by Roxana, and the dominant influence of his mother. The actual shooters were never identified. In 2015, José and Elsa received house arrest, José due to his health and Elsa due to her age, allowing the kids to live with them again. The media continued to cover the children's story for years, during which time Monica and Graciela had no contact with them. The boys shuffled between homes known to their father but strangers to Roxana's family. In the second week of January 2017, the court allowed the children to spend a weekend with their maternal grandparents for the first time. The Galliano family prepared their home with fresh paint, a thorough cleaning and decorations. They hung balloons and made a colorful welcome sign. Graciela prepared their favorite dish. That weekend, the Galliano home was filled with joy as the boys played soccer, video games, and even asked to sleep in their grandmother's bed, whom they hadn't seen in over 2 years. On November 24, 2018, José died after another stroke. The event was another blow for the children, who attended their father's funeral. During the funeral, they expressed their concern about their future with their Aunt Monica. She assured them with calmness and love, promising to support whatever they decided. They chose to live with Monica, who then had to confront Elsa to communicate the boys' decision. Through these and many other instances, it was clear that Monica always acted in alignment with her nephew's wishes, whether they wanted to talk or preferred silence. Monica's primary goal was to provide stability and comfort for the boys. In March 2019, Geronimo chose not to change schools since he was close to his friends and had 2 years left there, so he went back to live with his grandmother Elsa. Meanwhile, Monica sought custody of the other kid. Things seemed to be stabilizing, but in the last week of November 2019, 87-year-old Elsa was moved from her home to the hospital, where she passed away on November 30th. The following month, Monica was granted custody of Nahuen. By year's end, Geronimo moved in with a friend of his grandmother. Both brothers continued to need psychological support to process their experiences, with Geronimo struggling with depression. Their psychologist noted the overwhelming succession of events they faced. In March 2020, just before pandemic restrictions started, the person Geronimo was living with passed away, leading him to seek refuge with his Aunt Monica until October 2020. Upon turning 18, Geronimo rented a small apartment and lived independently, supported by income from his inherited properties. Monica began legal proceedings to secure their inheritance, fearing they might be deprived of their assets. Nahuen, meanwhile, showed emotional stability thanks to the support he received and was encouraged to return to therapy whenever needed.